All right, I think we are now broadcasting. And I wanted to talk just a little bit, since I've got the floor tonight, about the class in general and the classes we've already had. I told Renell the other day, I think this class it's kind of like the palate cleanser or something. After two pretty heavy classes, this one is just nice, cute, furry animals and a little bit lightweight compared to the others. But the last thing I want people to come away with from these classes, when we have these folks who are really experts in their field come in, one problem is they come in, they talk about all these things that they know intimately, and if you're not careful, you can find yourself thinking, oh, I could never do that. You know, I'm intimidated by the whole idea. You know, they know so much, I'll never know that much. And one of the reasons that we're not having a final exam in this class, well, there's a couple of reasons. One is I'm inherently lazy and I didn't want to put it together and have to grade it. But I actually started to put one together for the last class, and I realized that, I mean, I'm a student here too, and I'm learning from all of these classes that are happening. And the things that you take away from a class may be different than the ones that I take away from the class. And no one is really in a position to tell you, here's the things you have to learn to get a Master Naturalist certificate. What I'm hoping is that after each of these classes, you'll pick up 5 or 6 little nuggets of knowledge or information that you will carry with you. And, you know, and it'll be a different 5 or 6 for everybody in the class. But it'll be something that you didn't know when you walked in that you know when you walk out. And that's going to make you a better rounded naturalist when you're out there. You know, I like to tell stories about all sorts of things. And my story about my greening as a naturalist, I've always been interested in wildlife. When I was a kid, I was chasing horned toads and lizards all around the prairies of Amarillo. I always wanted to be a wildlife biologist. I went off to school in East Texas over a very different habitat. And to be a real biologist, I had to take courses in plants. And I wasn't interested in plants at all. But I had to take a course in plant taxonomy. And one of the requirements of the class was we had to make a collection of 100 different wildflowers. So I'm out driving the roads of East Texas with my plant press, and I'm jumping out and collecting flowers and everything. And I remember thinking at the time, boy, it's a good thing I had this class in East Texas, because back in the Panhandle where I live, we don't have any wildflowers. Well, I went home over spring break, and lo and behold, there are wildflowers in West Texas. I just hadn't noticed them before. And I thought I was already a naturalist. You know, I was 20 years old, and I had no idea how many flowers were in the Panhandle of Texas until I took a course about flowers. And I am still a terrible botanist, and we will find out tomorrow when we're on the San Pedro that I don't know the name of a fraction of the plants that are out there. But by golly, I do look on them, and I do appreciate them, and the ones that I do know stick with me. And so, you know, you're not going to learn 70% of the material that's presented in these classes. You're not going to learn 50% of it. But if you walk away with a little bit more than you knew when you came in, then, you know, we've done our job. And so I don't want anyone to be put off by the intensity of the classes. I'm asking a lot of these folks, you know, come in and teach a meteorology class in 3 hours. That's asking a lot, and the best they can do is to just hit the high points. But I thought that our weather and climate went really well. The insect class went really well. I'm pleased. These were the classes that in the first iteration of the Master Naturalist class, the folks I had kind of missed the mark. And with something like insects, there's so many of them out there that if your particular interest is robber flies, as the guy who did our class, you learn a lot about robber flies, but you don't learn much about anything else. But Margarita did a good job of kind of giving us a little bit of an overview. My job is easier tonight because mammals are almost a bite-sized bit. Even though we have a lot of mammals, and how many do we have on the list here? 96 mammals? That's probably as many mammals as any county in the United States. Now, You may have heard that, Yes, yeah, we are on. At one time, there was a factoid going around that the San Pedro had the second highest mammalian diversity in the world. That's not true. As in so many things, the tropics have more species than the temperate zones here. But 96 mammals is a lot of mammals for one county. And the reason for that, we talked about in the very first class, that overlapping of Chihuahuan and Sonoran Desert, the Rocky Mountains, the Sierra Madre. We have the desert, we have the grassland, we have the riparian, we have mountains going up a mile into the air and all the life zones that come along with them. So that's the reason we have such a diversity of mammals. But having said that, you just don't see mammals very often. You could, when you take a walk and you see a mammal, almost any mammal, it's a red letter day. A lot of birders will do a big day and try and see as many species as possible in a day. I've seen over 150 species in a day, not even really trying very hard. There are some people that have seen over 200 species of birds in one day in southeastern Arizona. I don't know that I've ever had a day that I saw 10 species of mammals. In fact, the American Birding Association magazine had a little article about mammal watching, and I think the record was 18 species or something like that, and that was on the coast of California, where you can see whales and dolphins and seals and sea lions and all those marine mammals. So we don't see mammals very often, but they are the cute, cuddly animals that everyone thinks of. One of my pet peeves is people are always equating mammal with animal. They'll say there's lots of birds and animals out there. Well, birds are animals, but what they meant is birds and mammals. We think of mammals as being animals. There's only about 4,000 species of mammals on the planet. There's 10,000 species of birds. So 2.5 times as many birds as there are mammals. There's 1 million species of insects, literally. So again, we're getting down to bite-sized chunks to, I can actually go through most of the mammals that are found in Cochise County tonight, or at least most of the groups, whereas Marguerite had no chance to go through most of the insects that are found in Cochise County. Whoops, boy, it jumped right ahead, didn't it? All right, starting out, very first of your list. These kind of go in a taxonomic order. And the very primitive mammals, the most primitive group are the marsupials. And we only have one representative of the marsupials in North America, and that's the opossum. Now, when I first got to Arizona, came from Texas, we had a lot of the same animals, but some different ones. And so one of the first things I did was get a copy of this big tome from the University of Arizona, the Mammals of Arizona, and began to learn the mammals of my new home in Ramsey Canyon. One night I was up walking on the preserve and I ran into an opossum. I didn't think too much about it. I thought, oh, that's cool, opossums. Come back down, pick up the Mammals of Arizona, and it says there are no opossums in Arizona. And I went, whoa. I said, I may not know all the animals here yet, but I know an opossum when I meet one. Well, what he actually says in there is that there have been some transplants of eastern opossums by homesick possum hunters around the Tucson area, but they didn't really take. And there is a subspecies of opossum in Mexico, but it's about 100 miles south of the border, and they haven't been recorded in Arizona before. So I thought, well, that's kind of interesting. And I found that this opossum down in Mexico has a dark tail and dark mask on the face and dark paws, whereas this guy has a light tail. This is an eastern opossum and a light face and light paws. Well, a few weeks later, I found another opossum. Here he is with that dark face and dark paws and a dark tail. This is the Mexican subspecies of the opossum. And I called the folks at the University of Arizona and said, found an opossum last night. They said, oh, did you collect it? And I said, no, because to some mammologist, until it's in the collection, it's not really verified. But I've got pictures of it. I've got measurements. It was definitely a Sonoran opossum. And since then, there are lots of roadkills. I found a roadkill one time, and I thought, well, I'll take that to the collection. But I got out, and he was a little ripe. He was a little past me putting him in the car, taking him to the collection. But opossums are fascinating animals. Being a marsupial, they've got a pouch. And when they give birth, the gestation period on the opossum is 13 days. So they're not pregnant for very long. But when that little, basically not much more than an embryo, comes out of the birth canal, it climbs up into the mother's pouch and looks for a nipple to attach itself to. They may have 15 or 20 little embryos, but they only have 13 nipples. So the first 13 to get to a nipple are the ones that survive. Once they get to a nipple, it expands in their mouth. They're stuck there for a while. And she's got a pouch full of babies that she can carry around. She doesn't have to go back to her den to take care of her youngsters. She's got them right there with her. They'll spend about 6 weeks in the pouch and also riding around on the mother's back until they're ready to be on their own. So even though it's a very primitive system, it seems to work very well. And opossums, they're not the sharpest tool in the shed. This was a female. Yeah. I didn't see. No, it didn't have any young. Here's the skull of a raccoon, and here's the skull of an opossum. They're almost the same size. The raccoon is a little larger, but look at the difference in the size of the brain case. The brain case of a raccoon is about the size of a golf ball. The brain case of an opossum is about the size of a grape. They're not real bright, but they're a survivor. They've been around a long time. Whatever they're doing right. And they've even expanded their habitat into southeastern Arizona. One of the cool things, even though mammals are not as common as birds, and even though mammals are hard to see, tonight I'm going to talk about 4 species of mammals that I wouldn't have been able to talk about 25 years ago as occurring in Cochise County. We have more mammals now than we did when I moved here in 1988. So that's kind of cool that we're getting additions to our mammalian fauna. Opossums have 50 teeth, more than any other mammal. Lots of little teeth. And if you approach an opossum, they're not very fast runners. They will bare those teeth and hiss at you. They call it sulling. They open their mouth and hiss at you. If that doesn't work, they will play possum. They'll play dead. When I lived in Texas, I had a little border collie, and one night there was an opossum out in the yard, and I said, well, I'm going to let the border collie out and see what he went running after this opossum. The opossum saw him coming and just went over and played dead, which freaked out. I mean, he was a really sweet dog, and he thought, oh, God, what have I done? I've killed him. He felt really bad about it. But we backed off, and in a few minutes, the opossum got up and walked off. There's a lot of theories and controversy about why they do that. I mean, if a coyote or a bobcat is trying to eat you, playing dead may not be the smartest thing to do. They may just be fainting away out of fright. Animals that are just playing with them, when they play dead, they're no fun to play with anymore. So maybe it works there. Who knows what's going on in that tiny mind of an opossum? But I don't think so. I think they are, I think they are unconscious for a bit, and then they come back to consciousness. I don't know. I'm sure someone has studied that, but I don't know the answer to that. Yes? The Sonoran and eastern opossums are hybridizing? No. Again, there aren't any eastern opossums within several hundred miles of here. The ones up in Tucson did not take, and we'll see this again and again, not only in the mammals, but when we get to the birds. These subspecies are kind of adapted to our area. A Gould's turkey does fine here, but a Merriam's turkey doesn't do well here. The Mexican wolf does okay, but a Arctic timber wolf wouldn't do well here. So these subspecies are kind of divided out by their range. Yes? Same lineage. Yeah. Yeah, and of course in Australia, they've got all sorts of marsupials, marsupial mice, kangaroos, all sorts of things. And how and why we ended up with one. There are some others down in South and Central America, but they're not very well represented here. The next group we're going to talk about are the shrews. And these guys, I don't even have a photograph of the shrews. You just don't see them very often. But they are tiny little guys. They're the size of the tip of your thumb. And it's a good thing they're that size, because ounce for ounce, they are probably one of the most ferocious animals on the planet. My mammalogy professor used to say if shrews were the size of Cocker Spaniels, none of us would be safe in the woods. They eat about twice their body weight. They'll take on a mouse or a centipede, something that far outweighs them. The Arizona shrew here was only known from a handful of specimens in the Huachucas and in Ramsey Canyon in particular. We had a mammologist come out when we were managers there, and we wanted to catch some shrews. Nobody had seen a live one. They catch them in traps, but they don't stay alive. And even in a deadfall trap, you set a coffee can in the ground and they fall in the coffee can. They'll starve to death overnight. So they're dead the next morning unless something falls in the can with them. And I said, that must be a mouse's worst nightmare, to be tripping along on the trail. You fall in a can and there's a shrew, you know. But if two shrews fall in the can, there'll be one of them there in the morning. They are ferocious. And some shrews, the short-tailed shrew, even has a mild venom. Not a venom that's going to be dangerous to people, but it helps subdue their prey when they have a big scorpion or something like that. So a very, very tiny little animal. You don't see them very often. Back at the nature center I worked at in Texas, we did a lot of field collecting of reptiles and things like that. So I was always going out and turning over rocks and logs. And I saw shrews occasionally, but not very often. And then I did a study. We found a roost area for barn owls. And we collected 100 barn owl pellets. And we took those pellets and dissolved away the hair and identified the skulls that were left behind. And about 20% of their diet was shrews. So the shrews were much more common than I thought they were. The barn owls were much better at finding shrews than I ever was. But these are tiny little guys, but ferocious. There's controversy about whether a shrew or a bat or a hummingbird is the smallest warm-blooded creature. They've almost reached the minimum size for warm-bloodedness. And there are shrews and bats and hummingbirds that weigh less than 3 grams. So that's about as much as a penny weighs. Yes, yeah. They're not like a mole. They hunt above ground, and they're active hunters off and on. And there was actually a study done on shrews at Fairbanks, and one of the things they found there is that if shrews find a lot of food, they will cache food. They will take food and store it up for later. They can come back if nest, they'll kill all of them and stuff some of them away so they can come back from later. There actually was a science fiction movie made. It's the Attack of the Killer Shrews, and it's pretty scary stuff. Although the shrews, I think they did use Cocker Spaniels in costumes for that one. Mostly nocturnal, but because of their high energy requirements, they're kind of active off and on day and night. Yeah.
Do they kill adult mice or just
Yeah, adult mice. Yeah, they can kill something that's twice their size. They are pretty ferocious guys. And now to the bats. One of the most numerous groups of mammals in Cochise County. How many species of bats did I have down? 21 species of bats here. And this is probably a good time to mention, for bats and mice and some of these tiny obscure mammals that you just never see, there's kind of an axiom in biology that often the range map of some of these species corresponds with the range map of graduate students. If you've got a place where there's a university with a good science department, that area is really well known. And even though Cochise County doesn't have a major university here, we're close enough to Tucson that a lot of the Tucson wildlife people come down here. And we have the Southwest Research Station over in the Chiricahuas. And for bats, there are meetings of bat biologists over there all the time. And so the bat fauna of Cochise County is very well known. And this is one of the additions. This is the Mexican free-tailed bat, which is one of the most common species. And it does have a free tail. It has a tail that extends beyond this membrane. The Brazilian free bat was just added to the Cochise County list just in the last 10 years or so, was found. The bat we probably know the best is the one that visits our hummingbird feeders at night. And there's actually two species of nectar-feeding bats. I hear them called fruit bats all the time. They're not a fruit bat, they're a nectar-feeding bat. And while there are some bats down in South America and Central America that do eat fruit, these just come to the nectar. There are three species, two of them here in Arizona, one of them in the Sky Islands out in Texas. But they make an oval migration. In the springtime, they come up through the Sonoran Desert when the saguaros are in bloom and they pollinate saguaros. And then in the fall and the rainy season, they come down through here when the agaves are in bloom and they pollinate the agaves. And they've also learned to visit our hummingbird feeders.
I noticed on the list it says American free-tailed bat rather than
Yeah, it's just a name change. Yeah, common names again are kind of fluid sometimes.
There's one with an asterisk, ghost face back in Patagonia.
Yeah, that's not in Cochise County, but it's over in Patagonia. So I included a few species on here. I didn't put them in the number, but I included a few that almost make it to Cochise County, but not quite. And a bat can fly, so who knows?
You mentioned, I'm starting with that, but how you put these in order, not just the bats, all of the mammals. Morphology, is that the right way to say it? What does that mean? How do you?
It's the taxonomic order, and it is kind of confusing. Nowadays, they're doing everything with DNA and looking at the clade, the tree that shows how the DNA is related on down the line and everything. And I always think of the taxonomic order going from the most primitive to the most advanced. You may have looked ahead and seen that humans come right after bats. There again, people say, oh, I hate bats. They're just furry little rats. They're not closely related to rats at all. They're more closely related to us than they are to rats. Because not that we descended from bats, but we split off more recently from bats than almost anything else. The primate line. That's it. Kind of goes back to the lineage of the family tree, going back to the bigger branches and what split off where. And they're able, by looking at the DNA, they're able to see similarities in the DNA between different branches, and they kind of know how far back things split across. And I found 3 or 4 different family trees of mammals that had different things in different places, and it all had, there's a lot of research going on. Some of this stuff is so theoretical that it hardly has any real world application. But this is just the way things are related to each other. You think about it, God, primates are not closely related to bats, but you think about it, we're not really closely related to deer or to carnivores or anything else either. That if you go back far enough, our common ancestor split off from a line that included lemurs and bats. So that's the best explanation I can give, and it's not very clear, but yeah. And in the bird list, they decided, oh, falcons are not really related to hawks, they're related to parrots. We'll put them down here. And it's all based on the similarities in the DNA level. The lesser long-nosed bat, or Sandburn's long-nosed bat, has a deep V here at the membrane there. This is a critter that has been on the endangered species list. There's a proposal to take it off the list, which is really good news. There are a lot more of these bats out here than we thought there were. But it's kind of bad news too, because having a bat on the endangered species list gives protection to all bats, because you don't want to mess with. And this also gives protection to agave, because you can't be destroying agave if there's an endangered species that depends on it. So I kind of have mixed feelings about that. The other species, the Mexican long tongue, was probably always equally rare as the long-nosed bat.
And so these are the two that are just listed as long-nosed bat.
Yeah, long-nosed and long-tongue, yeah. And I just got some beautiful pictures. I almost need to turn the lights off to fully appreciate these pictures that Randy Babb with Game and Fish took. Here's nectar feeding bats with this long tongue visiting the agave. Look at that shot. Isn't that a cool shot? And here's a Merlin Tuttle picture coming to the saguaro. And they come to that saguaro and just stick their head clear right down into the flower to get that nectar. And so when they come out of there, they're covered with nectar, or with pollen, yeah. And when they go to the next flower, they're pollinating that next flower.
There is a saguaro that's blooming in winter here.
Wow.
Yes. It's worth it to go and sit.
Yeah. Well, and as I mentioned in the first class about ecology, one of the things I tell people about the nectar feeding bats is they are the primary pollinators of agaves. They've done experiments with exclosures where they keep the bats away from the agaves, and the agaves don't set seed. So without these bats, we would not have agaves. And without agave, we don't have tequila and we don't have margaritas, which is stretching it a bit. Most tequila is grown on plantations from clones, but still, without the nectar feeding bats, they would not be around. I did a project down in Belize, a tropical field course one time, looking at the resource partitioning of bats. I may have talked about this in the ecology talk. You wonder, why are there 20 species of bats in the same area? But they feed on different things. These are nectar feeders. Some of them eat moths. Some of them specialize in things on the ground. And in the tropics, you've got fruit-eating bats, you've got frog-eating bats, you've got vampire bats, you've got bats that eat other bats, you've got frog-eating bats, fish-eating bats, all sorts of things. Here, it's mostly insect-eating bats. And look at that cute face. I mean, bats have gotten a bad rap over the year. You talk about bats, and some people, their skin just crawls. And mostly it's because the pictures you see of bats, they're being held by this giant hand, and they're scared to death, and they're baring their teeth, and they look ferocious. It takes a picture like this. It's a nice little smiling face of a long-nosed bat. Big eyes, because their prey doesn't fly around. They don't have to echolocate to catch bugs and things. Their flowers are going to stay put, so they locate them mostly by sight. They don't have that big weird nose that a lot of bats have that helps them zoom in. And you can kind of look at a bat like this and begin to empathize with them a little more than some of the other weird bats that are out there. Well, that's why they make this migration. They're going up in the saguaro time and back down in the agave time. And they may feed on some other things along the way. There may be some other flowers that they feed, but their primary food is the agave and the saguaro.
Do the nectar feeders differ from the insectivores as far as their echolocation?
Yes, yeah. Again, the nectar feeders don't have to really echolocate very much. And again, the maybe some of the takeaways here are just myths of things you've heard for years that are not exactly true. Blind as a bat? Bats are not blind. Bats can see perfectly well, and some bats depend on their vision a lot. Bats also have another sense, that echolocation, that it's hard to even explain how that works. I spent some time looking through the mammalogy text trying to to wrap my head around how this echolocation. You get the idea, yeah, they send out a sound and it comes back. But some bats, let me jump ahead here. Some bats have these really bizarre structures on the face and bizarre structures in the ears, and they're not quite sure what's going on there. One theory is that these baffles keep them from hearing their own sound, and some of them are making sounds through their mouth and some of them are making sounds through their nose. They're very high frequency sound, but they're able to hone in on a moth or a mosquito or something flying along and intercept that thing in midair. And the arms race that the armed forces have had for years, you've got missiles that can use radar to lock onto an aircraft. So now they've got aircraft that has jamming capabilities to confuse that missile from locking onto it. There are moths that give a chirp at the same frequency as the bats to throw them off, to confuse them so that the bat can't hone in on the moth. The moth is jamming the signal with his chirps. The Mexican free-tailed bat that I showed at the very first is one of the most common bats around here. There's a cave in Texas near San Antonio at Bracken Cave, has 20 million free-tailed bats that come out every evening. 20 million bats coming out of this cave, fly around. The flight is so dense and it shows up on radar. You can see on the weather radar when the bats are coming out of the cave. They eat 200,000 pounds of insects every night, spread out all over the Texas Hill Country. And even though, as I said, bats can see in total darkness any more than anything else can, think about what's going on down in the bowels of the earth. Down 20 million bats coming up out of that cave, flying in a three-dimensional system, navigating entirely by the sounds that they're making and the sounds they're getting back when there's another 19,999,000 bats all around them. It's amazing. It's one of those things that's just hard to wrap your mind around how this really works. The pallet bat feeds a lot on the ground, goes down to the ground, eats centipedes and scorpions, tarantulas, things like that. They can take off from the ground. Some bats can't do that. Let me back up to, here's the typical bat picture. That's a scared bat, but he looks pretty ferocious. And some bats, as they're flying along, will use this wing membrane and tail membrane to scoop the moth or the insect out of the ground, out of the air. They don't catch it on the wing. They scoop it out of the air with their tail membrane or their wing membrane and then feed. And you can see these bones in the wing. This is analogous to the finger bones on a hand. This group, Bat Conservation International, is based out of Austin, and they have done a lot for bat conservation. There's, in fact, in Austin, in one of the bridges over the Colorado River, folks go out to watch the bat flight. Even in Tucson, there are some places where you can go to overpasses and watch the bats coming out. When we first came to Arizona and people would call and say, what's going on? My hummingbird feeder was full last night and this morning it's empty. And we'd say, oh, you got bats coming to your feeder. As often as not, they would go, ooh, yuck, how do I get rid of them? Who wants bats around? And we would try and explain, well, they're just furry little hummingbirds. They're really cool. One of them is on the endangered species list. They're very special. And now, as often as not, when someone calls and says, what's happening, and we explain they've got bats, they think it's kind of cool. And you can put up a little wire mesh cage around one feeder to keep the bats away and set that aside to have the hummingbirds have something early in the morning. But I enjoy watching the bats come into the feeder and just knowing how special those nectar feeding bats are. They're not as good at hovering as a hummingbird is. They'll come up and just kind of stall out for a wing beat and then drop away. But they get in a holding pattern and they'll come in one at a time and and come to the feeder. I tell folks they're a lot better at sharing. They're a lot more civilized than hummingbirds are, but Attila the Hun is more civilized than most hummingbirds. But the bats will just kind of get in a holding pattern and drain one feeder and move on to the next one. Yep.
You talked about all these bats that specialize in a particular food, and it just like the ones that eat frogs. And then I'm listening to you or one about the woman studying those
Golden toads.
And they disappeared. It just seemed to me that for animals that's so specialized in their feeding that it's just, I mean, obviously it's working for them, but it just seems like they're a big risk.
Well, you're right. Yeah. And the frog-eating bat keys in on the mating call of the frog. So if you're a male frog, if you're going to be real loud and conspicuous, you might attract a female or you might attract a predator. But you're right, the more specialized a creature is, the more susceptible they are to a population crash. Things like coyotes and raccoons that are really adaptable and can eat just about anything and live just about anywhere, they're going to be doing fine forever. But things like black-footed ferrets that need prairie dogs, and when the prairie dog town declines, the ferret declines, things that are really specialized. The ivory-billed woodpecker, it needs great big grubs in old growth forest. The old growth forest disappears, the big grubs disappear, the ivory-billed woodpecker disappears. So the more specialized you are, the more you're taking a risk. It's like business. If you were in business and you only sell one thing, if that thing goes out of fashion, you're in trouble. So you can over-specialize. Yeah. In about equal numbers, and sometimes it's hard to even tell them apart. The long-nosed, the long-tongued bat has as long a nose as the long-nosed bat, and the long-nosed bat has as long a tongue as the long-tongued bat.
That's the one where you said it might.
Yeah. The V in the tail is the long-nosed. They're both very similar, and feed on the same things and roost in the same caves and mine shafts and things like that, and we're both protected. And this is the part in the checklist where we've got humans right after the bats. And think about it for a minute. This is an exercise I sometimes do in a beginning birding class. You're going through, you're looking at all these different species. What picture would I show to illustrate what a human looks like? Who would I show to show what a human is? We're so variable, and the same is true in a lot of other species too, and that's why a lot of folks want that bird or that mammal to look exactly like the one in the guidebook, and they don't always look like that. There's individual variation there too, and humans. I actually left humans off the list the last time I did this class, and I thought, talk about a keystone species, talk about a species that has altered the habitat and the planet for everything else that lives here, who's not only can go up in space and look down, but can be seen, the results of our labor can be seen from outer space. Humans have affected this planet more than just about any other creature, and yet we're just another mammal out there, and we can't be ignored, and we're here to stay. So at least for the short term. We may be outlived by coyotes, but that gets to another story.
A lot easier to see.
Yeah, mammals are the one species that I almost always see when I go on a hike, and sometimes when I've got little kids out on the hike, we do a little game where I'll say, okay, there's one animal out here that everything's afraid of, and if they hear it coming or see it coming or smell it coming, they're going to run away. What do you think it is? And you get all these guesses of bears and wolves and lions and things like that, and then I'll start giving them hints. Had one group, and I said, well, this animal wears tennis shoes, and the kid goes, oh, I know. Okay. Roadrunner. I thought, well, wait a minute. But A, they don't think of themselves as animals, and B, they don't think of themselves as scary. But the fact of the matter is there's no scarier animal in the woods than us. And pretty much all these other things we're seeing here tonight, given a chance, are going to get away from humans. So that's kind of a good game to play with kids on the trail, to kind of put them at ease that nothing's waiting out there to grab them, but also make them think about their place in the ecosystem, because they do have a spot in the ecosystem. Now we're getting to the rabbits and hares, and there is a difference between a rabbit and a hare. We have a couple of species of cottontail rabbits. We have the desert cottontail and the eastern cottontail, short little ears. You know, I don't need to tell you what a rabbit looks like. But the jackrabbit, jackrabbit is not a rabbit. It's a hare. And the difference between the two, there are several differences. Rabbits are born naked and helpless and blind, just little hairless things that stay in the nest for quite a while before they're really able to take care of themselves. A hare is born fully furred and able to hop around, and very quickly is able to take care of itself. You notice that we're not calling the rabbits and hares rodents. They're not a rodent. Even though they've got big teeth in the front, they've also got some extra teeth back here. They got 4 teeth here in the front, whereas a rodent only has these big incisors. There are some other structural differences between rabbits and hares, but basically here we've got the two cottontail rabbits and 2 jackrabbits. We've got the black-tailed jackrabbit is the most common one that we see a lot of different places. And then there's one called the antelope jackrabbit that occurs on the San Pedro. I've seen them down in Mexico. I've never seen them on this side of the border. They're a lighter color. The ears are a little bit lighter. And these hairs along the side, they can erect them when they're excited and they run away. They flash those colors. I looked on the internet to see if anybody had a video of it, because it's the coolest thing. You just get this rippling of white up and down the side. And it's got to be confusing to an eagle diving down on them to all of a sudden see this display going on the side. Yes? Oh, cool. Yeah, the players, yeah. Yeah, you know, someone in the last class was mentioning that the change of direction, you know, not like they turn on a turn signal, but it's confusing to anything chasing them. All of a sudden, that outline kind of switches and all. The first time I saw it down in Mexico, I thought I was seeing things, you know, just this weird rippling white pattern on the side of the jackrabbit as they ran away. There's another jackrabbit over in the boot heel of Mexico, over the Gray Range. That's the white-sided jackrabbit. That's a really strange creature. They live in pairs. They're almost always together within just a few feet of each other. An odd social behavior for a hare, and but they haven't been seen in Cochise County, so I don't have them on the list. Now, when I started doing interpretation about our sky islands, one of the examples I used to give of the kind of island biogeography of our area, the way kind of like the Galapagos, each little mountain range has its own particular plants and animals. One of the examples I used to give is over in the Chiricahuas, they have chipmunks, but here in the Huachucas, we don't have chipmunks. Well, that was true 25 years ago, but it's not true today. Beginning about 10 years ago, chipmunks started being reported up in the Huachucas. I've seen several of them at this point. They're well established. Now, how they got here is anybody's guess. I can't imagine a chipmunk coming across the Sulphur Springs Valley from the Chiricahuas on their own. What I imagine happening is a backpacker going to the Chiricahuas and getting up in the morning and zipping up his duffel bag and then coming over here and camping for a while and unzipping the duffel bag, and a chipmunk hops out. But of course, it takes more than one chipmunk to make a population but maybe it was a pregnant female. Who knows how they got here? But this is an example of our changing checklist. 20 years ago, even 10 years ago, I would have said there are no chipmunks in the Huachucas, but today there are, the cliff chipmunk. And chipmunks are distinguished by the stripes on the face. In places where there are also ground squirrels, a golden mantled ground squirrel also has stripes on the back, but he doesn't have stripes on the face. So now we're getting into a group of rodents. We're getting into the rodents and we're getting into the squirrels. And the rodents are, again, one of the largest groups. Squirrels, being diurnal, are the one we see most often, but the other species are a little harder to find unless you're a mammologist setting out live traps. You will probably never see a lot of these tiny, tiny little guys. And we'll get to the mice later on here in the rodent talk, but their ecological niche is they are basically cannon fodder. They are food for everything, and they reproduce like crazy. There's a small mouse, and I can't remember the which species it was, mentioned in the mammalogy text, that the gestation period is like 28 days. They have 4 young. Those young are able to breed in about another month. If you started with 1 pair of those mice and every offspring survived and all of their offspring survived and all of their offspring survived, in 1 year you would go from 2 mice to 1 million mice. You would be hip deep in mice. But everything eats mice. And you remember in our first talk, we talked about the food pyramid and the way you got all the plants down the bottom, and then you've got this big thing in the middle of all the tiny little herbivores that are feeding. And it's the carnivores on top of them that keep that in check. In places where they've gone to war with their mid-level carnivores, there are accounts of places where the mice are just, I mean, you walk out in a field and they just, hundreds of them running in front of you in the field. Not all rodents. We'll talk about a couple of rodents here that have a little different strategy. There are different strategies for reproduction. One of them is the mouse or the Gambel's quail model. I'm going to put 20 babies out there and I hope 2 of them survive. And actually, you know, if none of them survive this time, I'm going to breed again next year and I'm going to live a while. And I put enough babies out there that maybe somebody will survive. The other model is I'm going to have 2 or 3 babies, but I'm going to take really good care of them and they're going to have a better chance of surviving. And there are some, even some rodents that take that route as well. They do care for their young, but if you've ever watched the Gambel's quail come into your backyard feeder, when you first see those little ping pong ball sized babies, there's 10 or 11 of them. A week later, they're a little bit bigger, but there's only 6. And a week after that, they're a little bit bigger, but there's only 3, except in a really good year. And in a good year, they all survive. And that's a good strategy for this kind of habitat. This gets back to what we were talking about. Even, you know, again, we're seeing how all these lectures are coming together. At Marguerite's lecture, the primary herbivore in southeastern Arizona is not the deer or the buffalo. We never really had buffalo here. The primary herbivore in southeastern Arizona is the grasshopper, because they can go from just a tiny population to millions of them within just a couple of weeks when the rains come. If you're a big herbivore and you've got an 8 or 9 month gestation period, you can't plan ahead saying, oh, it's going to be a good rainy season next August. I need to go ahead and breed, you know, this February. It just doesn't work that way. But the grasshoppers can go from almost non-existent to abundant seemingly overnight. And that's the way our food supply here in the desert goes. It goes from almost non-existent to abundant overnight. So things like mice and grasshoppers are much better suited for this boom and bust economy that we have than something that just rocks along. The antelope squirrel has a stripe on the back. He looks kind of like a ground squirrel or a chipmunk. You see them down in the desert more often than up in the wet country. And they're almost always holding this big tail over their head, almost like a parasol. They carry their shade with them. This is a round-tailed ground squirrel. This was down in Tucson. Looks kind of like a prairie dog in this picture, but it's actually much smaller and slimmer than a prairie dog is. The rock squirrel. Yes.
I was going to say, if anybody wanted to see those little animal squirrels, Tucson would roll on Allen Road.
Yeah.
A little restaurant. Just sit out there on the porch and eat, and then just run it back.
Oh, cool. Yeah.
Tucson wood rolls.
Gralls. Yeah. Rock squirrels, a common big ground squirrel around here. We see them. This is a squirrel that will hibernate in the winter, so we don't see them through the winter, but they do come out in the springtime, and they're one of the most common big squirrels you see up in the mountain foothills. I'm going to talk a little bit about prairie dogs, and then we'll take a break here in a little bit. I could talk for hours on prairie dogs. They're just such cool animals. They are not here in Cochise County right now. They've been reintroduced over at Las Ciénegas Natural Area over near Sonoita, and there is a small population over there. There's a population 5 miles south of the border, just south of Coronado Memorial down in Mexico. There are black-tailed prairie dogs, but there are no black-tailed prairie dogs left in this part of Arizona. The cool thing about prairie dogs, there used to be, yeah. I'll show you a chilling picture in just a little bit. Prairie dogs are such social animals. They live in prairie dog towns. There was a prairie dog town in West Texas that was 200 miles long and 100 miles wide. Probably had 400 million prairie dogs in that one town. They were at one point one of the most abundant mammals in the West. Estimate up to 4 billion prairie dogs lived in the West at one time. They live in these towns. Within the town, there is these neighborhoods they call coteries, and the alpha male in the group is the first one out of the burrow in the morning, the last one back in the evening. He goes around and patrols the boundary. When two prairie dogs meet, they kiss. They do an open mouth kiss and touch tongues, and they know whether they're from that particular group or not, or whether this is friend or foe. They know with this open mouth kiss, and they'll chase them off if they're not from the same coterie. They live in underground burrows. We think we're so smart with our underground houses and rainwater harvesting and all that sort of stuff. The burrow system of a prairie dog is set up. They've got these turnaround burrows where they can come in and listen for danger. One burrow has a higher chimney than the other, so you get a chimney effect. You get air going through there, so it's air conditioned. The warm air comes in, goes underground, cools off. Dew forms on the side of the burrow, so they don't have to go anywhere to drink water. They've got bathrooms underground. They bring their waste out every now and then, clean the bathrooms, and put it around the burrows where there's a little donut-shaped depression that collects water. So it's irrigated and fertilized, and they cut down any weeds that come in. They grow a lot of their own food right around the burrow entrance. Just in the last 10 years or so, there's a researcher up at Northern Arizona University that has been working on language in prairie dogs. And he has some fascinating stories to tell. I've been interested in prairie dogs for a long time, and I knew even 30 or 40 years ago that in a prairie dog town, if a hawk flies over, they give a little bark and everybody dives underground. If a badger comes into the town, they give a bark and everybody comes above ground. So there's something in that bark that not only says predator, it says what kind of predator you're talking about. Well, this researcher in Northern Arizona has now, they can record these things, they can slow them down, they can look at the sonograph. These prairie dogs, if I walk into a prairie dog town, they're not only going to say there's a human in town, they're going to say there's a big fat guy with a green shirt on in our town. If I'm carrying a gun, they will note that. If I've shot that gun, they will note that. And they will remember me the next time I come into town, even if I don't have that gun in my hand. There's a prairie dog town in Santa Fe that's kind of in the middle of town. And those prairie dogs have a word for skateboarder because there's a skateboard park nearby and the skateboarders hassle the prairie dog. The only time they use that particular bark is when a skateboarder comes in, and no other prairie dog town gives that particular call. He had his researchers observing a prairie dog town, and they saw this German Shepherd come in the back of the town a couple of 100 yards away. And all the prairie dogs gave this bark, but it was the bark that even the researchers, even with the ear, could recognize was a coyote bark. And they said, aha, these prairie dogs can't tell the difference between a German Shepherd and a coyote. And they were speculating, well, I wonder if a Cocker Spaniel looks enough like a coyote. I wonder if, what it takes for them to discriminate. Well, while these graduate students were discussing that, the animal got closer and closer, and finally one of them said, take another look at that animal. And they looked, and it was a coyote. The prairie dogs were right all along. Again, I could go on and on about prairie dogs. And in fact, I think one of the things, the Friends of the San Pedro are doing some evening programs, and I've been put in charge of coming up with some natural history programs. I'm going to put together a program on prairie dogs themselves and their society and all the cool things. And I'm not going to answer this phone. That's a really good point, because the conflict with prairie dogs came years ago. Somebody said, oh, they're living in the prairie, they're eating grass, and they had this chart of how much grass it takes for particular animals. And he came up with a figure that a prairie dog takes 256 prairie dogs to eat as much grass as a cow. How he came up with that, nobody's sure. But those people in West Texas did the math, and they said, gee, we've got 400 million prairie dogs. How many cows could we have if we got rid of our prairie dogs? And they started getting rid of prairie dogs by the millions. They've done studies recently where they put cows on a prairie dog town and they put cows on a grassland away from prairie dogs. They measure the weight gain, and they find that the cows on the prairie dog town gain weight just as fast as the cows away from the prairie dog town. The prairie dogs are not competing for the same food, and since the prairie dogs are little farmers and are growing some of their own food, they actually are producing food that the cows can eat. So they're not directly competing with the cows. But by the time we realize that, and some people still haven't realized that or would argue that, we already wiped out the prairie dogs. This lovely picture, the caption on it was 7 miles southeast of Fort Huachuca, Arizona. And that's a pile of poisoned prairie dogs. Those are the ones that died above ground that they were able to pick up. The others died below ground. So this was probably Ramsey Road, Carr Road, somewhere like that. Yeah. And our tax dollars, or your parents' tax dollars, paid for it. They're easy to poison. And so they're pretty easy to wipe out.
In the last slide, you had poison in that's and the reference to other species are predators.
Yeah, well, this is kind of a confusing slide here. There are a number of species. There's like 150 species of creature that live in prairie dog towns. Some of them are really obvious, from things like rattlesnakes and black-footed ferrets and burrowing owls that can't dig their own burrow and need this. Some of them are predators. The badger is a predator. The ferret is a predator. Poison is the worst enemy of them. The rattlesnake probably doesn't eat any prairie dogs, but it can use their burrows. But these animals are not all living in an active prairie dog burrow. Around town, there's lots of abandoned burrows, that the burrowing owls are living in, and the rattlesnakes and the gopher snakes and all sorts of other things. So this is kind of a stylized picture. They like the prairie dog towns are open. They cut down a lot of the weeds. They'll keep mesquite from encroaching. They'll maintain a prairie as a prairie. And that open grassland is good for mountain plovers and bluebirds, burrowing owls. You can always kind of tell the burrows that have burrowing owls around because the burrowing owls are really messy. There'll be lots of carcasses and stuff. It's like the house block that's got the cars up on cinder blocks and things like that. Although there is some speculation that the burrowing owls will purposely spread droppings around the front of their burrow to attract insects, and then they eat the insects. They eat the beetles that come to the droppings. This is the reintroduction site. I need to just turn this thing off. This is the reintroduction site over at Las Ciénegas. And they've got some nice signs up that tell about how the prairie dog reintroduction was done and why it was done. I went to the public meetings here when they were talking about doing it, and they were pretty contentious. A lot of the ranchers are, oh, it took us years to get rid of them damn rats. Why do we want to bring them back? And, oh, our cattle are going to break their legs in their holes. This is a common thing you hear all the time. There was a guy up in Wyoming that went to a Cattlemen's Association meeting to talk about prairie dogs, which is a brave thing to do. But he asked the crowd, how many of you have heard about cows breaking their legs in prairie dogs? Oh, everybody's heard about it. How many of you have ever seen it happen? And nobody raised their hand. It's one of those, oh, my Uncle Joe knows a guy next door. There are holes. I wouldn't want to gallop a horse through a prairie dog town, but they're not as dangerous to my mind as, kangaroos and all sorts of other things. You have to be pretty stupid to break your leg in a prairie dog hole. And they lived with the bison, and the bison didn't go limping across the prairie on 3 legs, I worked at a nature center in Fort Worth, and we did a project to reestablish prairie dogs on the nature center. And this is long before the days of the internet, and I went to the library to search how to do it. There are stacks of papers on how to get rid of prairie dogs, but very little information on how to get them started. But we picked an area that looked at the soils maps and the slope and the grass and everything, thought this is where they need to go. Our first trip, we went out and caught a bunch of prairie dogs. We would find a burrow and put a fire hose down there and turn on the fire hydrant and fill up the burrow, and the prairie dogs come climbing out and we'd grab them. So we found that they were pretty easy to catch. We found we couldn't catch them in a live trap. That was the only way we could do it was with and we had some burrows that we would put a fire hose down and turn it on, and it would never fill the burrow. There was enough surface area underground that it was absorbing the water faster than we can put it in. We built some enclosures out of chain link fence. We put the prairie dogs in the chain link fence, and they walked right through it. The mesh was too big. So we built another enclosure out of chicken wire. We put the prairie dogs in there. They climbed over the chicken wire and were gone in an afternoon. So then we built an enclosure with sheet metal down in the ground about 3 feet and up out of the ground about 3 feet. And they stayed in that enclosure for about a week and a half or 2 weeks before they burrowed out. And they moved about a 1/4 mile to a pasture where we had a small herd of buffalo and settled in there. And it was like, of course, an overgrazed prairie with the buffalo, that's where the prairie dogs should have been all along. And they knew that, and I didn't. But we did get them established there at the nature center. And every time I go back to Fort Worth, I go out to the prairie dog town and say hi to them. So it's really a neat critter, and it's one that is missing from our ecosystem. It's one of those keystone species. Think about that big town in West Texas. 400 million prairie dogs, all those holes in the ground. That's the area that's the recharge area for the Ogallala Aquifer. How much of that water went down and into the aquifer deep underground and didn't evaporate away the way we were talking about in our weather and climate talk? How much of an effect did that have on the aquifer below? So let's take a break here, about a 10-minute break, and we'll come back and get into squirrels.
Somewhere, might have been in connection.
Yeah, I was out there about 2 weeks ago.
You notice all the cages around?
No.
Yeah, I was out there last week.
Yeah.
And I read on how they react.
Yeah, yeah.
Almost on every hill or burrow was a cage.
I wonder if they brought some more in.
Well, they brought in a bunch.
Yeah.
Because, I mean, I went with Larry Morgan. I don't know if
Yeah, yeah.
And we were wondering, would they die out?
Well, you know, they've had problems. It's hard. Our prairie dogs have trouble keeping up with the growth after the monsoon. Everything grows up so fast, and if they don't have a wide open vista, things can sneak up on them and they disappear. In fact, one method of prairie dog control is to just put hay bales out in the town and give the coyotes and foxes a place to hide, and they'll kill the prairie dog. So they need that wide open spaces, and our prairie dogs here have trouble keeping up with the monsoon. And I wonder if, you know, Empire Cienega may not be the best place for them, but
Cages almost, I don't know how many cages, a lot of cages.
yeah, yeah.
And we said, well, you know, this is.
They may just be trying to supplement that. You know, they may have a critical number that they don't want the colony to drop below 50 animals or something. Yeah. Because they are such social animals.
I read that large ears on animals help teeth. That's protection against.
No, it's like a radiator. The blood goes up into the ears and is cooled. Yeah, that's a jackrabbit. Yeah. Yeah.
So, I got water for the truck.
Oh, you didn't bring any? You didn't bring any?
I got a bunch of bottled water in the truck.
We can talk about that if we've got several folks who are in a conflict with it. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. To the San Pedro? Okay. Well, these are all just optional. You know, we'd love to have you along, but yeah. Yeah, well, everybody's got a busy life, and I know it's hard to get 15 people scheduled all.
This is
Bear. Yeah, bear. There's the lion.
Did you already go over these?
No, I haven't. The only one I've talked about is the opossum and the raccoon, and just the difference in the size of the brain case in these two animals. Opossums are pretty slow-witted compared to a clever little raccoon.
So these numbers don't go with
No,
these?
no.
Okay.
And then I talked a little bit about the rabbits. You know, the rodents have just these big incisors, and the lagomorphs, the rabbits, have extra teeth in there.
What kind of animal is that?
This is a beaver.
Oh, it's a beaver. Oh, I should have known by then. I would love to see one of those.
Where's that snaggletooth possum?
That one?
That's the possum.
Right here.
What about the skunk?
He's a little head too.
That's the skunk.
Yeah.
No, I don't go anywhere. I gotta take some water.
Well, this is porcupine.
Okay.
People like this is javelina.
Javelina's here. Coyote,
This is happening.
bear, deer,
Wow.
fox, ringtail.
It's funny how the coloring is so much similar. I didn't ever see one up close.
I'm going to be.
It's kind of fancy there with the javelina has that engraving in there.
So what's a pickery?
It's a javelina. Yeah.
I know, I tried to read what pickery was, and it's like, I still don't know anymore.
Yeah, there's 3 species of peccaries. So we have one, and then there's 2 down in Central and South America. But, yeah, it's our, and everybody calls them pigs, but they're really not pigs.
They sure stink.
Yeah.
Do they ever breed with like wild pigs?
No.
That'd be a deadly combo.
Yeah, they're completely different orders. Yeah.
Down in that Terlingua,
They're different families.
So much drought down there.
Mm-hmm.
I ran into one guy who's been feeding them. So every day about 4 o'clock, he's buying feed, out of his own pocket. He puts a long row, and they come out, and almost like get in line, pigs in a trough.
Yeah.
We did the mistake when we first moved out here because we were feeding birds. And we didn't have a fence around our property yet. And we bought one of those big square seed things. Yeah. And put it out there. Wow, the birds love that. And all of a sudden we hear this commotion at night. We go out there. There's like 6 of them out there just.
Yeah, and a lot of those seed blocks have molasses as the binder, and the javelina will smell that. They will break down our picket fence to get to quail block. It took me, about 2 quail blocks to learn that I can't do that at my house because they'll just.
Well, we were dumb city.
Yeah, well, I didn't know either, but
I know.
yeah.
But I'll tell you what, the little babies. Oh my God, they're so adorable.
Little striped thing, look like a watermelon.
Oh
Yeah,
my God.
yeah,
Little titty footballs.
Not impressed.
yeah.
Aw, I think they're adorable.
So where can you use a quail block?
Well, if you set it up off the ground, you're all right. Of course, the quail are more likely to come when it's on. And there are some quail blocks that don't have that molasses as a binder, but that molasses smell just it drives them
So
crazy.
if you put it on a table like that high, is that enough?
Yeah, and a lot of the birds will, they'll feed on the table and they'll knock enough off onto the ground that the quail will have something, but the javelinas will,
The quail will fly up to use it.
some of them will, yeah.
Okay.
I need to know how to get to the San Pedro house.
Okay, it's Highway 90, the highway that's right out here that goes from Sierra Vista over towards Bisbee and Tombstone. Just head down Highway 90, and just before you get to the San Pedro River, you'll see the river from miles away, the stripe of green cottonwood trees and everything. And there's a big sign that says San Pedro House, and you turn right before you get to the river. And you can see it from a mile away. And there's a big sign on the highway that says San Pedro House that will direct you there.
And then it's easy to find once you follow the sign.
Yeah, and you just go down, there's a big parking lot, and we'll be right there at the house. Yeah.
Okay.
And we're meeting right at the house.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Well, they mowed out
Let's go ahead and get started. I'm 40% of my way through our time, and I'm just made it to the squirrels, so I'm going to have to quit telling all these stories. I don't know if we even have any. I don't think I have any control over. Yes.
Okay, you know the rodent teeth that the beaver have?
Mm-hmm.
Beaver and other rodents.
Yeah.
And so rodents don't always have those, or do they?
They do. Yeah. All rodents have those big incisors, or the big front incisors.
So does the jackrabbit.
Jackrabbit, nope. He's got big incisors, but he's also got two other teeth back here. Yeah.
Oh, really? Okay, so those ones, okay. And then the other thing is, why are they colored orange?
The color on the front, this is a little harder than the softer enamel in the back. So when it wears away at an angle. The back wears away faster than the front, so it puts an edge on it. The color? Yeah, well, I don't know whether the coloration is what adds to the hardness, perhaps. Something like that, yeah. Okay, we're still in the middle of the rodents. So the fox squirrels are a good example of that biogeography I talked about. The Apache fox squirrel, the only place where it is found in the United States is in the Chiricahuas. Whereas the Arizona gray squirrel is in a lot of the mountain ranges here. So, and we don't have the fox squirrel in our mountains. So that's a good example of that island biogeography that we talked about. There is a squirrel on Mount Graham. The Mount Graham is a red squirrel, and it's only found on Mount Graham. It's one of those relics. And again, the habitats north of I-10 tend to be a little more Rocky Mountain than the habitats down here. We seem to be more Sierra Madre. But on Mount Graham, there's a relic population of a red squirrel up there that is endangered. One of the most common mammal signs that you see as you walk along the trail, you see these little mounds of dirt, and you wonder what's going on. You look at them, and you usually don't see any sort of hole. You just see this mound of dirt. And what this is signs of excavation of a pocket gopher. And the gopher comes along and digs this tunnel underground, and he's got to do something with that dirt as he's digging. So he comes up to the surface, pushes that dirt up to the surface to get it out of the tunnel, and then blocks the tunnel behind him. So he's not exposed to all the predators and elements, but he has to do something with that dirt, so he puts it up. So you could literally, from all these mounds of dirt, just kind of connect the dots and see the whole network system of this pocket gopher. He spends 98% of his life underground. And you know, remember the old cartoons where you'd look out and you'd see your garden and the carrots are getting pulled? Pocket gophers do that. They'll get those tubers from underground and yank them down below where they can feed on them. When they do come above ground, they've got small eyes. They don't need big eyes because they're underground most of the time. They got small ears because they don't want to get a lot of dirt in their ear. They got big whiskers so they can navigate underground. They've also got a short little naked tail that they use like a curb feeler. When they're back, they'll come out of their burrow, and if something frightens them, they'll just back into the burrow, and that little tail helps them find their way back into the burrow. At the nature center I was at in Texas, we had an exhibit for a pocket gopher. There was like a giant ant farm. It was a big sheet of glass and about 4 inches of space full of dirt, and the gopher would dig his tunnels, stay underground, and you could see the tunnels underground. Every morning when I come in, it would all be rearranged, and he learned when it was feeding time, when I would come take the top off the exhibit, he could feel those vibrations, and I'd put sweet potato and carrot and apple and things in there, and he would come up to the surface and go grab it and go back down, go grab another one, go back down, then cover the hole up. It was really fascinating to think of all of that life that's going on under our feet in a place that, you know, we don't know all the stuff that's going on underground. But if you've got to worry about foxes and hawks and things like that, and you can find your food under the ground, you're a lot safer. You wonder why they're called pocket gophers? Here's the cheek pouches of a pocket gopher. This one, unfortunately, is a deceased pocket gopher. You can see the long claws and these cheek pouches, and the cheeks close behind the front teeth, so he can chew on things and not get dirt in his mouth. He can chew with his teeth and not get any dirt in his mouth. And if he finds a nice juicy tuber underground, he can stuff them into those pockets and take them over to a storage spot and leave them there to come back to. So we see a lot of mounds of pocket gophers, but we don't see pocket gophers very often. But if you're ever out walking and you find a mound that still has an exposed hole, particularly if the dirt looks really moist and fresh, just stand there very quietly and wait, and you'll probably get a chance to see him come up and do maintenance on the hole, because they don't like to leave that hole exposed for long. Yes?
I was going to ask you about mold. We have in the bone box, we've got a patch of mold skin.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So I was going to ask you about that.
We don't have moles here. Moles really need kind of deep, loamy soil, very, very friable soil to burrow through, and they eat mostly earthworms and things like that are living in the soil. Our dirt, our geology is just not right for having moles. But moles have that really cool skin, is so they can go forward and backwards in the tunnel without any resistance. Not quite as nice. Shrews have that same kind of soft little fur. Okay, now we're getting into the mice, which again, you're not going to see. They're out there, but unless you're a mammologist, you're not going to encounter the rock pocket mouse. Whoops, boy, just went crazy here. You might see kangaroo rats, or more often you would see burrows of kangaroo rats. We'll see kangaroo rat burrows tomorrow on the San Pedro. A big burrow with a big hole, because they do hop like a kangaroo. And to go in, they need a little bit more headroom than something that's slithering around on the ground. And they have really good hearing. If you see a skull, look at these big auditory bullae here. This is the inner ear of the kangaroo rat. So they really have a good sense of hearing. And this is an animal that doesn't need any water, doesn't need free water. Gets all the moisture it needs out of the seeds that it eats. In fact, if you had one of these in captivity and put a bowl of water out there, he wouldn't drink it. He doesn't know what to do with it. They get all their food from the seeds, so they're well adapted for life in the desert. Yeah. Some of the ground squirrels are the same way. This guy is not so adapted for life in the desert, and yet they're an important part of the ecosystem here. This is the largest rodent in North America. Some beavers go up to 70 and 80 pounds. The beaver used to be common on the San Pedro River, back where the San Pedro empties into the Gila. One of the early trappers named the river the Beaver River. By 1900, they were all gone, and for almost 100 years, there were no beavers on the San Pedro. But in 1999, they were brought back. The first one they brought back was, they brought him from Phoenix. They didn't go up to Canada or Wyoming and catch a Rocky Mountain beaver. They brought a desert beaver down, and I think he weighed 74 pounds. He was a big, big rodent. And they're doing quite well on the river now. And it's a very different habitat for beavers on the San Pedro. San Pedro is almost dry for a couple of months out of the year, and then for the next couple of months, it's a raging torrent. So if you're depending on building beaver dams and those dams staying in place, you're going to be in trouble. Our beavers mostly burrow back into the bank side. I think this is the release of the beaver, and here's a beaver hole back into the side of the bank. But they will build a little dam just to raise that water level so that their hole is flooded, and that protects them from anything coming through that hole to bother them. But what it also does, you raise that water level, the water goes back in the banks of the river as well, and in dry periods, it can come back out of the river. So having beavers makes the river a more perennial stream. So they're changing the flow of the river, they're changing the vegetation along the side. They cut down willows and cottonwoods, but willows and cottonwoods are really fast-growing trees, and the beavers don't completely destroy them. They'll come back pretty quickly. You don't see them very often. They come out mostly at night. Sometimes if you find a place with a beaver dam along the San Pedro and go down there late in the evening and sit there quietly, you'll see them swimming around. If they see you, they slap their tail on the water. It sounds like a horse falling in. That's their alarm call that they've spotted danger. If they are, what did I do with me? Yeah, the the largest rodent that we have here. And look at those big old incisors. And these, as I was explaining earlier, these big orange teeth here wear away with a bit of an edge to them. This orange part is a little harder than the white part in the back, so it wears away with a little bit of an edge there. And those teeth keep growing as long as the animal is alive, so it keeps chewing on things, never wears its teeth down, and keeps them nice and sharp.
Most amazing thing I learned is that they climb trees.
Beavers?
Yeah.
I've never heard of one climbing a tree. Yeah. To take, well, I've seen, you know, a tree as high up as they can stand, which is sometimes a foot and a half, but I've never seen chewing high up a tree. Oh. The little deer mice, again, extremely common, but we almost never see them. But if you were a coyote or an owl, you would know well about deer mice. Wood rats, this is our pack rats. Build big middens, gather up all sorts of stuff and gather it. Paleontologists look at fossil pack rat middens to learn what plants were here thousands of years ago by examining the middens that they leave. And here's my favorite mouse. These guys are so cool. The grasshopper mouse. Would you flip the lights back there for a second so we can watch this video?
Believe it or not, this 6-inch carnivorous critter howls like a wolf. Grasshopper mice rise up on 2 legs, nose to the wind, and release a high-pitched growl to defend their territory. Don't tell these puppies to eat their veggies. They dine on grasshoppers, worms, even spiders and scorpions, taking them down with a split bite to the head. Now chew on this. Grasshopper mice are the only meat-eating rodents in North America.
Now, isn't that a cool mouse? And I have been walking out along the road in Portal in the evening and hearing grasshopper mice doing that little howling off in the desert. It's a real high pitched, but it's just kind of cool to think that these little guys are out there howling away. And I think we talked about when Marguerite was here about the bombardier beetle that has we saw one out when we were eating, squirts out 2 chemicals that combine and create an explosive blast that is their protection. They do a little headstand and point the rear end out and they shoot those chemicals out. Well, the grasshopper mice have learned to grab a bombardier beetle and stick its butt in the sand, and you've just disarmed it, and then you can eat it from the head down. And you find these little butts stuck in the sand out there. So for every defense, there's for every offense, there's a defense. But and there are 2 species of grasshopper mice. There's a northern grasshopper mouse and a southern grasshopper mouse, and they have both been found on Ramsey Canyon Road. I don't know how you would tell them apart, but I guess a mammologist can do so. But that's one of my favorites. Frequently, if you watch the bird feeders at the San Pedro house or at Mary Jo's or maybe your own bird feeder, you see a little softball-sized rodent come out. The cotton rat, hispid cotton rat or yellow-nosed cotton rat is a common mid-sized rodent that will come to your bird feeders. Whoops. Well, this clicker has got a mind of its own. Another big rodent is the porcupine, and they are not common at all. I've only seen a couple in the years that I've been here. Dutch, you've seen them down on the San Pedro at least once. I was talking to a biologist, in fact, Randy Babb, the guy that took those great owl photos, and he said, because I'd heard that porcupines used to be much more common than they are today. Talked to a fellow who established an orchard over in the Sulphur Springs Valley, and he had real problems getting his orchard established because of the porcupines. And Randy said that the population of porcupines really went up when they were doing really aggressive predator control, mostly mountain lion control. The mountain lion population went down, porcupine population went up. They relaxed the mountain lion control a bit, the mountain lions came back up, and the porcupines went down. So just anecdotal, nobody knows for sure. I asked him if he'd ever seen a mountain lion with porcupine quills in its face. He never had, but just kind of anecdotally, it looks like the mountain lions are a control on porcupines. Porcupines and beavers and prairie dogs are rodents that only have 2 or 3 young. They don't have a dozen young and 6 weeks later have another dozen. They just have 2 or 3 once a year. So they don't reproduce as quickly, and if you're killing off the adults, you can affect the population a little quicker. They've got spines on their back. They can't throw their spines, but they will thrash their tail around, and you don't want to get one of those spines in you. It's got little barbs in it that will keep going deeper and deeper and deeper. I have a friend up in Alaska that had a dog that was killed by porcupine. He got spines in its face, and they weren't able to get them all out, and some of them eventually worked their way clear into the brain. Yeah. When they're born, they have just kind of almost soft, silky like spines that harden pretty quickly. A baby porcupine is really cute. All right, everybody knows this guy. And coyotes, or coyote, I hear it pronounced both ways. There's song dogs here, are one of the most successful predators in North America. They have spread now. They're found in every state in the Union except Hawaii, and I figure it's only a matter of time until one of them catches a boat to Hawaii and makes it complete. There are coyotes living in Central Park now. They have benefited from the eradication of the wolf. The wolf was a major control on coyotes, and without wolves, they have spread. They're very adaptable. They'll eat just about anything. They can live just about anywhere. And we have been at war with coyotes for a couple of 100 years. We've been shooting them, we've been poisoning them, we've been trapping them, we've been snaring them, we've been gassing them, we've been shooting them from helicopters. And what we've done for the last couple of 100 years, the coyote is one of these animals that's able to kind of adjust its reproductive output. If there's not much competition and there's lots of food, they'll have lots of pups. If there is a lot of competition and there's not much food, they will not have many pups or will only have one. So they can adjust their reproductive rate depending on the availability of food. And what we've been doing for the last couple of 100 years is killing off all the stupid coyotes and encouraging the really smart ones to reproduce. So we've been selectively breeding for intelligent coyotes, and they are really smart critters and amazingly successful. Come on. You hear them at night. When you hear what sounds like 20 coyotes out there, it's probably 2. But they're one of the wonderful sounds of the West. Yes?
Do they have a hierarchy similar to wolves?
No, they're not really a pack animal the way a wolf is. Sometimes you see them in groups, but they don't have that social structure of a wolf. And that may be one of the reasons the wolves were easier to wipe out than the coyotes have been. The coyotes can be more solitary and don't necessarily hunt in groups. If a coyote's living in the wilderness, he will be quite happy in the wilderness eating squirrels and rabbits and things like that. If you come into that wilderness and build your farm, he will quite happily eat your chickens. If you build a subdivision there, he will quite happily come along and eat your house cats and take your garbage. Here's one in the middle of Tucson strolling down the road. And again, they are have spread beyond the West. And there are some places where they have interbred with either the red wolf, which is a small southeastern wolf, or there's some speculation that they've even interbred with the wolves up in the north. There are some places where there are mixes of dogs and coyotes, coy dogs, that again can be a big problem. So you got to give them credit. They are adaptable.
Just a quick question. So
Mm-hmm.
they don't have an actual alpha male or any of that sort?
No.
Do you know if they do have like a pack leader?
You don't really see them in big packs. You see them, in 2s and 3s and 4s, but they don't have the same sort of social order that a wolf does.
I watched a pack of about 7.
Wow.
2 years.
Yeah.
Period. Watched 3 pups.
Yeah.
Next year, 3 pups again. And one was always like the dominant coyote. He was always much
Yeah.
larger than
Yeah.
the others, and he was always on like watch out for him. And I actually had him he didn't attack me and my dogs, but came up and did a bluff.
But yeah. Wow.
Stop.
Well,
It's in Tucson.
yeah.
It was actually there's an old dump that's closed down. Now they made one side of it a BMX track.
Mm-hmm.
But they have found like culverts and used the
As-
culverts as their.
Yeah.
They've been doing this for years.
Wow, that's really interesting. I'll have to read up on that. I'm not aware that they were able to do that.
5 point
Yeah.
in this old gravel pit, and I could sit up there at the top of the point and watch down below into like a small.
Yeah. So you know more about social order of coyotes than I do. Yeah. Yeah.
Year after year, you just you can see if they had a good year, they have more pups.
Yeah.
You watch the mother tend to the pups, and they're pretty smart. They had lookouts. They had one main one.
Mm-hmm.
They had multiple on the other side that the pups came out with culvert, and they would just sit there and actually watch, and if anything happened, the mother would send the pups into the culvert, and the other 2 would kind of bring in a little bit of the space and stand guard and watch.
Hmm.
It's kind of like desert / old dump site where they used to have a.
Yeah. Probably a lot of rodents and things. A lot of yeah.
I just watched a group of 3
I know,
working
they
together.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know if it's a small family group, but they do hunt, as a kind of act.
Yeah.
They assist one another in hunting, and they try and cow who was just a baby. And I believe the baby was dead.
Yeah.
And they do that in different directions and eventually.
Yeah. Yeah.
And anyway.
Yeah. Well, they are really smart and adaptable. Yes. Mm-hmm. Yep. Yeah. Yeah. No, I don't think. I wish I could give you a definitive answer. I really don't know. And there probably is someone who has studied coyote language and knows a little more. But they can make some god awful noises, and that high pitched yipping and all. And again, what sounds like a dozen animals out there is probably 2. They really can make a lot of noise. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And she'll be out there, and we've seen she was out a ways from us by herself, and she saw them. I was just wondering.
There have been a few reports of attacks on children. It's not, that's not doesn't happen very often, but it is possible. And some of the animals were rabid, others were really hungry and all. And with some of the other predators, things like mountain lions, you know, they don't make any real distinction between a person and a deer or whatever. And certainly with a lion, most attacks on people from mountain lions are joggers or bicyclists or something. And you go running past a lion and it's like dragging a ball of yarn past your house cat. They're going to jump out and knock you down. It's just instinctive. And a small kid running down the trail, to them, is just, you know, another part of the ecosystem. So, you know, I would worry about a toddler, any child that's old enough to make a lot of noise and you know, move independently and all. Not that toddlers can't make a lot of noise. Shows I've never had kids. But you know, I wouldn't say that it could never happen, but it's not something I would really worry too much about. Although, again, there have been some instances of it. Really more attacks by coyotes than wolves. Coyotes are much more common than wolves, but everybody's afraid of the big bad wolf, and there are very few instances of attacks on people by wolves. Wolves are more wilderness animals. Yes.
Coyotes are over there.
Yeah.
I was wondering about the brain, because the guts are smart and the brain.
Yeah, pretty good sized brain. And you know, we know canines really well because we live with dogs and we know what they're capable of. And there's not a lot of difference between a coyote and a wolf and a dog. They're the same sort of intelligence and adaptability and the social nature that you're talking about. That's what makes a dog such a good companion. Coyotes are omnivorous. They've got sharp teeth in the front, but they have kind of molars in the back because they do eat a lot of berries and fruits and things like that. And when we get to the cats later on, we'll see that a cat's dentition is different. They're strictly a meat eater. The little kit fox occurs in Cochise County. This picture was taken by Dave Creeper. Some of you know Dave from his years here on the San Pedro, but this was taken over in New Mexico. I don't know that I've ever seen a kit fox in the wild, but I suspect they're at Las Ciénegas and any sort of big grassland area like that. They're more of a grassland fox. We do have gray foxes, though, and I really like foxes. Foxes they're kind of like a cross between a dog and a cat. They've got some dog-like qualities and some cat-like qualities. Our gray fox is a very good tree climber, and they can go quite a ways up a tree. I was out at Wilcox several years ago in the wintertime, and I had a birding group, and I had dropped them off somewhere, and I took the van to get gas. And on the way, I saw a big cottonwood tree and a nest up in the tree, and in this nest, I saw a couple of little things sticking up, and I thought, aha, I found a great horned owl nest. And so I went and got the group, and I brought them back. And I said, I found a great horned owl sitting on the nest. And I set up the spotting scope, and here was a fox looking at me from 40 feet up in a cottonwood tree. They make a lot of interesting little chirps and whistles. Don't sound like a dog at all. And they're called gray foxes, even though they do have some red on them. They don't have retractable claws the way a cat does. But again, they're pretty good at climbing, and they're really good at eating insects, mice, small birds, things like that, but also fruits and berries, whatever they can find. The bears, we've got black bears, which is not to say they're all black. Sometimes we have a brown black bear or cinnamon black bear. The species is black bear, but the colors can vary. And we have a pretty good population of them here in the Huachucas. It seems when there's not much fruit in the high country, they come down onto Fort Huachuca or into some of the orchards along the edge of the mountain range. This picture was taken in Huachuca Canyon a year or so ago. And they've even come right into Sierra Vista on occasion and down on the San Pedro. Not often down there, but they're more of a mountain animal. But Whoops. When it goes, it goes. One of the neat things about this area, we're getting into some of that diversity. Most places in the United States only have one raccoon, the one member of this family, the raccoon. This is the one that everybody knows, with the little black mask, and the long fingers leave a track that looks like a little tiny handprint in the mud. But we have 3 members of that same family here in Cochise County. We have the raccoon, and we have the coati. And the coati used to be called coatimundi, and there's a story behind that. They have a really interesting social structure. The males are solitary, and they're more of a dark mahogany brown. The females and the young travel in troops, and there'll be several females, and they're young of the last couple of years. I've seen troops. I saw a troop down in Mexico that probably had 75 animals in it. More often here in the Huachucas, I see groups of 10 and 15 regularly. And you see them just foraging along. You see those long tails sticking up in the air. If you look at the map of Cochise County, there are a couple of places called Monkey Canyon or Monkey Springs, and they probably were named for these critters, which of course are not monkeys. They're members of the raccoon family, but they do travel in troops. They're a diurnal animal, a daytime animal. That's really unusual for a member of the raccoon family. And they are pretty much just found here in southeastern Arizona, a little bit over into New Mexico. They've made it up as far north as Silver City now. Occasionally there are reports from Big Bend of Texas and down in the Rio Grande Valley, but they're really a tropical animal. Years ago, I read a book called Chulo by Bill Gilbert about this guy spent a year with a troop of coatis at Coronado Memorial, south end of the Huachucas. And I read this book years before I ever dreamed I would come to Arizona, and reading about these exotic animals and this exotic sounding place, I never dreamed that I would someday be right in the middle of them. But they're a fascinating addition to our fauna here.
You know that map with the different colored green beans, is that?
This is range expansion just in the last 10 or 15 years. Yeah, coatimundi. Coatimundi means solitary coati. They used to think that there were 2 species. One species that was solitary and one species that was traveled in groups. And then some bright student noticed that all the solitary ones were males. So they're the same species, but they're so different in their behavior that they thought they were solitary. So coatimundi means solitary coati. So the correct name is coati. White-nosed coati is the coati that we have here.
So that makes sense. Somebody had told me coatimundi male.
Yeah, yeah. And I saw something the other day that one of the native names for them was the lonely one or something like that. But again, it has to do with the solitary nature of the males. This was over in Garden Canyon a couple of years ago. They're just really cute little guys. They look like a cross between a raccoon and an anteater. But they will work across a hillside, and any ground nesting birds or insects or lizards or scorpions, anything, it's like Sherman's March to the Sea when they go across a hillside. They have a scorched earth policy. When I was at Ramsey, I had, it's getting kind of personal here. I was having a really bad day at work one day. It just, bureaucracy and all this stuff. And about 10 o'clock, I said, okay, I've had it. I'm going up on the preserve. And I walked up on the preserve, and I found a troop of coatis. There were 17 of them. And there were 6 or 7 little babies, not much bigger than my fist. And they were working along this hillside. So I would go up in front of them and just go up and sit down on the hillside very quietly. And they would just come working their way past me and move on. And then I would go down and go up in front of them again. I spent the rest of the afternoon with this troop of coatis, and it was one of the best days I ever had at Ramsey. And I was thinking, you guys are who I'm working for. It was really restorative for me to spend the day with those little guys, but cute little fist-sized baby. And they make a little chirping sound. Some of the times when I've found them, I think I'm listening to a bird, and they make this little chirping contact call.
The little fist-sized guys who are running around.
Yeah,
They
yeah.
don't carry 'em.
No, they don't carry them, no.
I saw a pack of females in the other.
Yeah.
When they saw me, they all scattered, screaming. And one went right up a tree and realized it was a sapling. It was only like 10 minutes. And head first came right back down that tree as fast as he went up there. Oh, it was amazing.
There was a researcher who was studying coatis on Fort Huachuca several years ago, and she had a number of them radio collared so she could follow them around. And she wore out about 4 sets of graduate students that summer because these coatis, they're in Ramsey Canyon today, they're in Sunnyside Canyon tomorrow, they're down in Coronado Memorial the next day. They move between canyons just effortlessly up over the cliffs and back down on the other side and everything. And they had a heck of a time keeping up with them. No, they're kind of nomadic, although they will sometimes build like a little nest in a tree. They'll gather up some material and build a little sleeping platform up in a tree. And they usually give birth in a cave or under a hollow tree or something like that, but they don't stay there long. They're pretty nomadic.
So you talked about the coyotes and how they're very successful in our efforts to get rid of them. Since these guys are expanding, they eat a lot of different things.
Yeah.
And then foxes are like.
Foxes are doing pretty well. Yeah.
They are doing well.
Yeah, foxes do pretty well. Yeah, coatis have expanded their range, and you know for instance, the Apaches don't really talk about coatis much, and you would think that they would if they coexisted with them, but in some of the early accounts of the first explorers through the area, they don't mention coatis, they don't mention javelina, so they're probably expanding their range somewhat into this area. Oh, they go clear down into Central America. Yeah, 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 yeah. There was something else I was going to say about them. Oh, because they're such social animals, they're susceptible to epidemics of disease. You get distemper will go through a whole troop, and so the population kind of does this. And all the researchers that have studied them have said, that there's real peaks and valleys depending on the disease. And that's because of their social aspect. And here's the third member of the raccoon family, the ringtail. People call them ringtail cats, but they're not a cat, they're a raccoon. They're about squirrel-sized in body length, but this long ringed tail. And you can kind of figure out from those giant eyes and big ears that they're mostly a nocturnal animal. I was talking with Ron earlier. I don't know that I've ever seen one out in the daytime. But sometimes if you're out at night looking for owls or whatever, and we used to at Ramsey, we would hear a little strange barking up in the trees sometime, and I would go out with a flashlight, and it would be the ringtail cat. One of the vernacular names for them was miner's cat because they're pretty good mousers, and evidently the miners would sometimes not really keep them as pets, but encourage them to hang around because they could control the mice. Unfortunately, I see them most often as roadkills over in the Mule Mountains. We see them with some regular. They like real rocky areas, like the mules. And now we're getting into the weasels. And this big squat weasel is the American badger. Very good at digging, long claws, can dig out a gopher or a prairie dog or a ground squirrel. And this is an animal, I'm going to have to kind of move things along here, that we were talking about the coyotes hunting cooperatively. There are instances of badgers and coyotes hunting together, particularly hunting prairie dogs. The badger starts digging at a prairie dog burrow, and the coyotes arrange themselves around the back doors and the escape holes, waiting to see if anybody runs out. And this is probably some of that commensalism. They don't share the food. I don't know that the badger necessarily gets anything out of it, but the coyote is smart enough to know that when the badger is digging at the front door, there might be somebody coming out the back door. And this is recorded in the literature quite a bit. I don't see badgers very often. They're an animal that really likes the grassland and prairie, and our grassland and prairie is disappearing. I've seen 2 road-killed badgers in the last month, which is always kind of sad. It's sad to see any road-killed animal, but particularly when it's something that is as unusual and unique as the badger.
That's the same badgers.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah, we didn't even know there was badgers here, and my husband takes 83
Mm-hmm.
to work, and he was driving to work, and he went across the road, and he got snapped a couple of pictures.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and we had no idea badgers were here.
Yeah.
Down towards Canelo.
No, going to from Sonoma, going from Sonoma to Tucson. Yeah.
I will sometimes.
Huh? I know that.
Yeah.
No,
Yeah.
but it was on 83.
83. Yeah.
But I'm saying north of 82.
Right, yeah, north of the crossroads.
I will go years without seeing a badger, and one day I had to come over to Sierra Vista to run some errands, and I came down 90 to Sierra Vista, and I had a badger across the road right in front of me at the San Pedro at Highway 90, and I went back on Moson Road and Hereford Road, and I had another badger across the road down. I had 2 badgers in one day, and then I would go 5 years without seeing another one. I know it wasn't the same one. There was enough difference between the 2.
And where do they live? Do they live in the prairie underground?
They're again pretty nomadic. When they have young and all, they will dig a burrow and hang around one place for a while, but they have to kind of wander around wherever the food is.
But they're good diggers.
They're very good diggers. Yeah. And you know, the Chamber of Commerce likes to talk about Sierra Vista as being the hummingbird capital of the world. Well, we're not the hummingbird capital of the world. We may be the hummingbird capital of the United States, but that's kind of splitting hairs there. But we are the skunk capital of the world. We have more species of skunks here in Cochise County than any place on the planet. Whoops, golly, this thing. You're getting to see all my pictures ahead of time. We have the striped skunk that is common throughout the whole U.S. This is every school kid knows the striped skunk, and they all know their defense. It's a very good one. They don't have to worry about being camouflaged. They're not fast runners. They're not good climbers, but they've got a chemical weapon that keeps most critters away from them. We also have the hooded skunk with a long plume-like tail and a kind of a cape on the front, very white, although some of them, I'll show you a picture a little later on of one that's almost black. We have the hog-nosed skunk that has a little pig-like nose on the front of it. And we have the spotted skunk, who's more like a weasel. It's very thin. When they get ready to fire on you, instead of turning around in a little horseshoe the way a striped skunk does, they do a handstand. Stand up on their front paws, the tail comes over the top, but they've all got that same chemical weapon that works pretty well against most mammals, certainly. If you think a skunk smells bad to you, think what it smells like to that coyote whose sense of smell is 100 times better than ours. Getting sprayed by a skunk is going to really disable you for quite a while from locating your prey, and it's something you're going to remember. The next time you see a black and white critter, you're going to leave it alone. Just like with the moth and the bat, for every offense there's a defense. For every defense there's a way around it. Skunks, mammals don't mess with them at all, but owls don't have much of a sense of smell. And so owls are out at night, and skunks are out at night. So owls are a real major predator on skunks. When we used to do wildlife rehab, probably half the great horned owls I ever got in smelled like a skunk. But it doesn't bother them. They don't really have a sense of smell, so they don't worry about it too much. There's only a dozen species of skunks on the whole planet. And we've got a third of them here in Cochise County. That's pretty cool. I just looked up to make sure that number was right. And there are a couple of skunks that are called like stink badgers. I think that's a great, like the Malaysian stink badger is one of the skunks. But we have a pretty good representation of skunks right here in southeastern Arizona. There's an eastern and a western hognose skunk. We have the western. The eastern is the only skunk that occurs in North America that we don't have here. So. And now we get to the cats. The bobcat is the most common of our cats here, but you don't see them all that often. In fact, there was an article years ago in Audubon from a researcher that studied bobcats, and the title of the article was "You'll Never See a Bobcat." This guy, outside of the ones he was studying, just didn't encounter them in the wild. But if you spend enough time in the woods or spend enough time driving around in habitat, you will likely see bobcats. They are out there, and in pretty good numbers. About the size of a Cocker Spaniel. They've got a small little stubby tail. One reason you don't see bobcats is frequently, instead of being right out in the open like that, this is the view of a bobcat that you get in the tall grass, blending in very well with in the tall grass. I don't know if you've ever had a house cat and been playing around with your house cat and stick your finger in its mouth, and you discover that these back teeth are not flat little molars. They are teeth that are made for shearing. They're carnassial teeth, and the cats are strictly meat eaters. They're not going to be eating berries the way a coyote will, and they've got those sharp teeth for cutting and tearing meat. And of course, they have retractable claws. That comes into importance when we talk about tracking and looking at animal tracks. So bobcats are pretty widespread, pretty much throughout North America. There are bobcats.
What surprised me about a bobcat is that that long. I always thought it was a little short.
Yeah, it's maybe 6 inches long. Yeah. And we also have a good population of this guy. And it's what we talked about in that first ecology lecture about the trophic cascade when the big predators are gone. And we still have good numbers of big predators. We don't see them very often. In 25 years of tromping around southeast Arizona, I've seen one mountain lion. I've probably been seen by dozens of them, but I've only seen one. And they are well adapted for taking deer and javelina and keeping the whole habitat in balance. Here's a lion track, and you can see it's kind of a roundish track, and you don't see any claw marks. That tells you right there that that's a cat. He's retracted those claws, and you're not seeing any claw marks. I wish I could tell you a story about hours of careful stalking to get a picture of a lion like that, but you probably recognize the enclosure at the Desert Museum. That's the best place to get lion pictures.
Why is their head so much smaller than the jaguars?
I don't know. A jaguar has really powerful jaws. They may take bigger prey animals. But yeah, a lion is kind of delicate by comparison. I'm trying to remember from that talk we had from the jaguar people. There's a distinction between the large cats and the small cats. And I can't remember which is which. The lion is a big, small cat. Our mountain lions don't really roar. They kind of scream. And one of them purrs and one of them doesn't. I'm sorry, I don't remember all of that. Again, in the last 10 or 15 years, there's been some exciting news here in Arizona with a number of sightings of jaguar. This was in 1996. Warner Glenn over in the Palencia Mountains, he's a lion hunter, His dogs were chasing what he thought was a lion, and when they finally got it cornered there in our desert mountains, was a nice big jaguar looking back at him. And he took pictures. These pictures were taken with an Instamatic camera, and then he pulled his dogs off and let the lion or the jaguar go, which is really says a lot about Warner Glenn and his sympathy and empathy for the wildlife that's out there. And there were a few months later, there was a jaguar seen over south of Tucson. It eventually settled in the area just west of Nogales. This is Macho B, who was well studied. They put out these remote game cameras and got a number of pictures. Unfortunately, this is the one that was later trapped and tranquilized and didn't survive the study and became quite controversial. This picture was taken over in the Santa Ritas last year, south of Madera Canyon, again from a game camera. And one of the interesting things, the jaguars that have been seen in Arizona in the last 10 or 15 years, they're all adult males, and the feeling is that the males range pretty widely, maybe as far as 200 miles. And if you go down into Mexico 100 miles, there are still pockets of jaguars down there. So these males are wandering up here looking for a mate, and they may cover an awful lot of ground in doing so. An interesting thing, though, in talking with the folks with the Wildcat Project out of the University of Arizona that's doing the studies, if they wander and wander around looking for a female, then why has this guy been in the Santa Ritas for 3 years, been in the same territory for 3 years? Does that mean he's given up on finding a female, or does that mean he's found a female and we just haven't gotten a picture of her yet? Nobody knows until we get a picture of a female or a cub. There hasn't been any reported jaguar reproduction in Arizona in many years, which is a point of contention. There's talk now about designating lots of southeast Arizona as critical habitat for jaguar. Can it be critical habitat if there's not a breeding population here? It can't be a critical habitat for just males. But unless they have a habitat, is there a way they're going to get established? It's one of those arguments that gets political in a hurry. But it's just kind of neat to know that there are jaguars out there, that there are places, and there have been sightings over around Karchner. Some of these cats may have come up the San Pedro or may have come through the Huachucas. We don't know. There's more and more monitoring going on right now, and there are hundreds of these game cameras out through southeast Arizona keeping an eye, so it's a little easier to keep tabs on what's out there. But it's just exciting to know that this big cat still roams even in 1s and 2s here in southeast Arizona. Yes? There are black jaguars, and they're found mostly down in South America. There are a few reports from Panama, and I think even into Belize, have been some reports of black jaguars. There's never been a report of a black jaguar that I know of in northern Mexico or in the U.S., but that's just a color phase. Even the black jaguars that you see in a zoo, if you see them on a bright sunny day, you can see that rosette pattern underneath the black. And these rosettes are unique enough that they can look at multiple pictures of a jaguar and tell if it's the same one. I think Macho B, this little funny mark right here, was the one they used to identify him in all the pictures. So a lot of the places that are doing the monitoring, they'll have a camera on both sides of a trail so they can make sure they get the right side of the cat. Again, when I started living here, really started doing these talks and started doing docent training for the Friends of the San Pedro. This was it as far as the cats of southeast Arizona. But 2 years ago, 2011, in Miller Canyon, there was an ocelot sighted. This is not the one in Miller Canyon. This picture was taken in Belize. But this little spotted cat is called the ocelot. Here's the one that was in Miller Canyon. Again, treed by some dogs, but they got pictures and video of him and then let him go. He's been seen on game cameras several times since, including he's been seen after the Monument Fire. So he survived the Monument Fire and is still around. And if you look at him, it's really kind of interesting because, again, we're talking about the different subspecies. Here's that Central American ocelot. Very kind of triangular head and very distinct marks. A lot of kind of distinct color in there. And our cat had a more rounded head and less distinct spots, more gray spots. This is consistent with the subspecies that is found in the desert and in the northern Mexico area. I was at a meeting, again, about rare species, and someone said, oh, that ocelot, it was probably just an escaped pet. You know, it's somebody's pet that got away. Now, you know, these animals are rare everywhere, and they're not in the pet trade. They're not even, you don't even see ocelots in the zoo. You go to the Desert Museum, you don't see that Sonoran race of the ocelot. This is our high desert ocelot.
So that might just be one individual.
Might be, yeah. We've only got the pictures of the one, and again, we've got. They did get pictures of another ocelot over in the Santa Ritas. It's not the same animal because the spot pattern is not the same, but again, it's only one. And I don't think they were able to get sex on either one of them.
What size are they? Because that one down there looks almost like a house cat.
Yeah, they're a little bit bigger than a house cat, smaller than a bobcat. There was a fellow down in South Texas who was studying ocelots down there, and another strange jungle cat called the jaguarundi. And at the time he started his study, and this was 25 years ago or more, the thought was they were both really rare, but they were there. He found that ocelots were they were more common in South Texas than anybody thought. They were just hard to find. But he never was able to authenticate a jaguarundi in South Texas. And there's no records from Arizona either. There are some apocryphal site records of, gee, I saw a cat and it looked like, and you go to the Desert Museum, you can see a jaguarundi because they do occur in the Sonoran Desert down into Mexico. But there's no records of jaguarundis in southeastern Arizona.
Those spots are different from the jaguar spots.
Yeah. They just little rosettes, yeah. And there is another cat down in Sonora called the margay that looks like an ocelot, is a little bit smaller, has a little longer tail. I've actually seen a margay down near Alamos.
Did you say longer?
A longer tail, yeah, than an ocelot. It's 8:20. Let's take a short break here. If anybody needs to run around to the bathroom or get a drink or stretch their legs, I'll try and get through the rest of this. So let's take a 5 to 10 minute break here, and then we'll jump in with the javelinas.
You said Texas Sky Islands earlier. Being in Texas, that's how.
Yeah, there are over the Davis Mountains and the Guadalupe Mountains in Texas are essentially Sky Island mountain ranges, just like ours, and the mountains in Big Bend. I haven't heard of anything.
They work out.
It has a small head.
Yeah.
Is it the raccoon that has the golden?
There's a training facility out there.
Yeah.
Dock Tower, yeah.
This last 2 weeks,
Well, in the last 8 years, out of 10, I've worked in raw materials.
Wow.
the green.
Yeah.
But 10, they're
Wow. Yeah.
So,
You know, they're dumbfounded or whatever.
Boy.
Put them in a tree or whatever like that.
Yeah.
High wind, but
That is troubling. Yeah. And we sometimes get reports like that from homeowners where they've, sprayed pesticides on the flowers or something like that. But well, out there, I don't know what it would be. No, there's no flowers.
we've noticed them in our shop.
Yeah.
We have a large shop.
Yeah.
I don't know, I just thought.
Those, I mean, we catch them.
Yeah, and they get in and their instinct is always to go up, and so getting back out the door is hard for them. Yeah, particularly if you got skylights and stuff like that. Swallows, barn swallows, or Phoebe or some sort. Yeah.
We get them all the time.
Yeah.
On the side of our buildings. And we'll get a couple occasional ones in there. They go to the skylight. They keep trying to figure out the skylight.
Mm-hmm.
But the hummingbirds have been kind of,
That is troubling, and I don't know. I can't think of what. I haven't heard any reports from anywhere else of that. Yeah.
I mean, just in the last,
That was on 83.
Oh, wow. That is a great shot. Man, that's cool.
I know. I can't believe he found. I mean, I had no idea we had actors here. I know it was something like way north. Yeah.
Oh, this is a kitty.
I just didn't really see his face.
Oh, that is really cool. They do. There is a group that does hummingbird banding on Fort there by the parade grounds at the Public Affairs Office. And my organization does hummingbird banding down on the San Pedro. I've been monitoring hummingbirds for years, but I don't know of a particular count that anyone does. And that's kind of troubling to.
Yeah, it's kind of
Yeah.
So they're smelling.
Noticing it.
And so sometimes they'll run to get away, and it looks like
Okay. Yeah. Well, we're at the beginning of migration, and the birds are coming in from further north, and sometimes they just don't have the food resources they need or whatever. This is a really stressful time for them. But why there would be 8 or 10 in one spot and we're not hearing it from other places, yeah, that's scary.
There's no parasite.
No, they're not really. They're such antisocial birds. They don't pass parasites around very much. They get when they're under stress, their grooming kind of goes downhill, and they'll get some little nits and lice, but not anything that really is going to knock them down like that. Yeah.
I know we've had.
Oh, I know. I got it for
Not
class.
just
Yeah.
magnificent.
The big guy. Yeah.
Matter of fact, I got some good pictures of that.
Mm.
We've also noticed a lot of kids
Yeah.
coming into our building dying. I know the building itself.
Yeah.
Pesticides.
Been sprayed. Yeah.
Because we get, that area gets such a large number of insects.
Yeah.
When the red ants
And you got lights on and stuff. Yeah.
Well, no, what they've done is, on this building when they first built it, it's only been out there right now 3 years. They put rain collection on the side of the building. And when the red ants come in before monsoon, right before monsoon,
Mm-hmm.
they will funnel to these
Collection. Yeah.
in the numbers of, per pod, there's probably 10,000. And they're just littered all across the building. And then we get them in our maintenance class.
Oh, wow.
And then the next day would be, at least 3 quarters of the original.
So I thought, oh, they got.
And it'll continue all of a sudden you'll see another species start moving in the ants. Wow. Now you get a ton of those caterpillars.
Yeah. Yeah.
Those kind
Yeah. Wow.
of
Is the building lit up at night?
It has the small,
Yeah.
lights there.
Yeah.
But all the lights go out.
Yeah. Yeah.
But we get them out, like the moths. And, trying to think of some of the other. Everything's in thousands, not
Wow.
hundreds or anything.
Yeah.
They come in and it's like drones.
Wow.
Right now we're caterpillar hunters are starting to go away. And now we're getting all the
Yeah. And the big lubbers and stuff. Yeah.
now we're getting those kind of now. Then eventually we're getting winter. The temperatures really start dropping. Yeah. It's pretty wild.
Okay, let's dive back in here and get through the last 30 minutes. Javelina's one of the most misunderstood animals around. There's a lot of misconceptions about javelinas. People automatically think they're pigs because they have a little snout. They're not pigs. They're a New World family, the peccaries. I've heard people say, oh yeah, they're not pigs, they're actually rodents. Well, they're not rodents either. They are, again, a family all their own. There's 3 species. We have 1, and there's a couple more down in Central and South America. They do have pretty good tusks. They do have a flat nose like a pig. They do have hooves like a pig, but they don't have a little curly tail or any tail at all. They've got a scent gland in the middle of their back that has a really musty odor. Frequently, you will smell a javelina before you ever see them. They have a reputation for being ferocious, but they're extremely nearsighted. They have a really poor sense of hearing. Their sense of smell is the only one that really works for them really well, and it's not very directional. So they will smell, oh, there's a human here, I better run, but they're not real sure which way to run. They might be running at you, they might be running away from you. So that's part of the confusion. Their main predator is coyotes, and because of that, probably, they really do not like dogs. And if you're out walking your dog, the javelinas may attack your dog. Or if you're a quail hunter out with your bird dog, they may attack your dog because they just do not like canines. So a lot of the reports of people being chased and treed by javelinas were people out walking their dog when the javelinas came up. But this guy with his little stiff walk and his hackles all raised on the back, he's upset about something. They do kind of rub nose to rear end to get that musky odor so that the herd all smells alike. Again, back in Fort Worth doing wildlife rehab, I had a couple of javelinas that I lived with for a while, and they would rub up against me and get that smell. I mean, after, you know, it's one of those things, after a while, I didn't even notice it, but I would go to meetings and people were all kind of, move away from this guy. Yeah, it's really, yeah. Okay, I probably ought to get moving.
They go around families.
Mm-hmm.
There was one family coming around where I used to live, and they stair-step kids.
Yeah, they seem to breed almost year-round. I see young in the middle of the winter and in the middle of the summer. And we have 2 species of deer in the area. We have the Cow's white-tailed deer and mule deer. The Cow's deer tend to be up in the mountains, and the mule deer tend to be down in the desert. Here's our little Cow's white-tailed deer. Next to the key deer, this is the smallest race of white-tailed deer in North America. I hear people pronounce it coos, but they were named for an early naturalist, Elliot Cowes, and he pronounced his name Cowes. So I'm going to pronounce it cows. Some of the differences between the white-tailed deer and the mule deer, one has to do with the antlers. And here's a point where I can talk a little bit about the difference between antlers and horns. There is a difference. When people talk about, oh, look at the horns on that deer. Deer don't have horns. Deer have antlers. And the difference is an antler is really, it's made out of like a bone material. And generally only the males have them. And they're shed once. So a deer has antlers. A cow has something that's made out of almost a fingernail-like material over a bony sheath. Both males and females have them, although the males tend to be a little bit larger, and they don't shed them. So they don't shed horns, but you do shed antlers. So that's the difference between an antler and a horn. Cows have horns, deer, elk, moose have antlers. And on the white-tailed deer, the antlers tend to come up, and all the points will come off of one central core. On a mule deer, you get forks like this. So the antlers of a mule deer and a white-tailed deer are recognizably different. Sometimes mule deer and white-tailed deer will hybridize. I've never actually, well, I have seen one. There was one over at the Southwest Research Station. They had a mule deer that was, they adopted as a fawn. It was found, its mother had been killed, and it was a fawn. And they took it up to the research station, and it hung around the station and had a little bandana around its neck, and it was everybody's favorite pet. And then it disappeared for a while, and it came back a few weeks later and had a fawn. And it was a mule deer, but it had a fawn with a white-tailed father, so it was a hybrid. And one of the interesting things about the mule deer is they have this peculiar gait that's called stotting. And it's kind of a bouncy gait with all 4 feet off the ground. And you never see a white-tailed deer do that. The mule deer do this kind of peculiar. There are some African animals do the same thing. And I understand that some of the hybrids even have trouble running because part of them wants to do that little funny gallop and part of them wants to do the regular whitetail run and get all confused. And now we come to this critter, which is another one that has a lot of misconceptions about him. First of all, its name. You talk to hunters all over the West, all over North America, and they'll tell you what great antelope hunting there is out here. We don't have antelope in North America. We have pronghorns, and the pronghorn is a different animal. And it doesn't have horns and it doesn't have antlers. It's got kind of a hair-like growth over a bony sheath that it sheds once a year. So it's not quite an antelope. It's not, it comes from a family called the antelocaprids, the antelope goats. And it's a family that in the Pleistocene had some amazing critters that they're all relatives of our pronghorn. Come on. Look at all these weird growths on the head. This one's my favorite. This that one's pretty weird. And these were all back in the Pleistocene. Here's my favorite, the kind of unicorn pronghorn.
So are you saying they're goats?
No, they're not a goat. They're not an antelope. They're something with a little bit of each. In fact, this this same website has a thing called Pronghorn Designed by Committee, because they erect their white rump patches the way antelope do. Their horns are more like a springbok. Their feet are more like a giraffe. They're just a really weird animal. They have, you know, components from all sorts of hoofed creatures. And they are the fastest land mammal in North America. They can do 60 miles an hour in a mad rush. And you think, why in the world would a pronghorn need to be able to run 60 miles an hour when there's nothing else out there that can do more than about 30? The answer is, in the Pleistocene, we had cheetahs. And these guys evolved in the Pleistocene on the prairie when there was a North American cheetah that could do 55 miles an hour. And if you couldn't do 60, you were in trouble. So they evolved that speed for a predator that is no longer around. Yeah, you know, we have a long history of misnaming things. We've got a prairie dog that's not a dog. We've got a ringtail cat that's not a cat. We've got a pronghorn antelope that's not an antelope. Our elk is not an elk. Our moose is not a moose. No. An elk is, in Europe, an elk is a moose. It's really confusing. Our elk is really a big deer, and our moose is an elk. But and some of it has to do with, you know, the first pioneers came. They saw a bird with a red breast. They said, "Oh, we'll call it a robin," even though what we call a robin here in the New World is nothing like what they call a robin in the Old World, except that they both have red breast. The prairie dog probably comes from the bark that they give. The pronghorn, it's, you know, it has superficial resemblance to an African antelope, but if you really look at it, at the anatomy and physiology of it, it's a different animal. But superficially, it looks enough like an antelope that they call it an antelope. And yeah, our elk, you hear them sometimes called wapiti, and that's a better name for them. Our buffalo is really a bison. Buffalo refers to the Cape buffalo and the water buffalo. So again, we've misnamed half the species we come in contact with. So, and that's one reason that even though I don't go into scientific names, if you're really talking with a scientist, they talk in scientific names because the common names, and you know, mammals and birds are pretty well standardized. You get into wildflowers, and what one person calls an Indian blanket, another person calls, you know, a paintbrush, and it gets really confusing. So you almost have to go with scientific names there. But our pronghorns are really cool. They were easily hunted out. Again, this is an animal that knows that it can outrun you, and it lives in the wide open spaces. So if you're 50 yards away from it, you're not a threat. It knows it can outrun a predator from 50 yards away. It can't outrun a bullet or even an arrow from 50 yards away. So they're relatively easy to kill. And our native pronghorns were pretty well wiped out. And the ones we have that you see over near Sonoyta, there's a small herd over on Fort Huachuca. You see them sometimes over on the way to Portal around Rodeo. There used to be pronghorns in the Sulphur Springs Valley, but these were all transplants that were brought from Texas and Wyoming and released down here. There's a Sonoran pronghorn that lives over in the Cabeza Prieta and down into Mexico. That is a desert pronghorn, and it's a species.
So you're saying there are no native pronghorns?
The ones here in Arizona are all transplants from Texas and Wyoming. There may well have been a unique race or subspecies that was here. I took these pictures just the other day. There's a male, here's a female with just a little spike, a little bony sheath. So this is, again, it's not a horn. Even though both males and females have them, they shed that outer cover once a year, and cows never do that. but it's not the bone-like structure of an antler. It's something in between.
Is it just the outer cover?
Yeah, yeah. It's just and the bony cover, and they do erect these rump hairs as a signal, a defense signal.
I heard that they won't jump fence.
And, you know, that's something I didn't mention, but yeah, they do not jump a fence. They go under fences. They can go under them at almost full speed, and you would think something as fast and as agile as them would be incredible leapers, the way a gazelle in Africa is. Although again, a gazelle is an antelope, and they're not. They're thinking they may have very fragile leg bones, and just not be able to take the impact of a high jump. Yep.
Not just the horns.
They're, you know, the male has a little bit stockier build and thicker neck and everything. Are you thinking of, you know, some other?
There's a color pattern also on
Yeah.
that changes.
I'm gonna have to look into that. Yeah.
I know I read somewhere.
Yeah.
There's like 4 or 5 different distinguishing marks on the pronghorn that tell you whether it's a female or male.
Okay. I'll look that up and bring it to class next week. I'll look.
I think there's 2 birds down in Santa Cruz, because there's one that's off of Elgin Road by the school. There's probably like 15 over there by a watering hole. And then there's another one that's we see off of 83 going north.
Yeah. Yeah, they just brought some more in about 2 years ago. They brought in another 15 or 20, and ought to try and get them well established. Quick review on the tracks. Long, very pointed track, kind of heart shape. This is deer, probably mule deer from where this was taken. Shorter and more rounded. These are javelina tracks. Oval tracks with a pad and claw marks. This is a canine, a coyote, and rounded tracks without any claw marks. This is a cat, probably a mountain lion. Okay, a few animals that are either very rare, and then we'll talk about some that are gone forever. Bighorn sheep, not really mentioned in Cochise County, but I have seen bighorns just north of Portal, that area where you go through the little bit of the Palancios going up towards Road Forks. Saw a little herd there, and there was a picture taken in the Huachucas on a game cam from Coronado Memorial of a bighorn, and I haven't heard anything about any speculation of where he might have come from. Yeah, it's been a couple of years ago, maybe. And our Mexican wolf is an animal that used to be here. In fact, the last Mexican wolves were killed on Fort Huachuca back in the 50s, I believe, so relatively soon. And this is a quote that I may not even be able to get through without tearing up, but this is from that Sand County Almanac, the Aldo Leopold book. He worked as a game ranger in northern Arizona, up in the White Mountains outside of Alpine. And this is from an essay called Thinking Like a Mountain. It says, in those days, we had never heard of passing up a chance to kill a wolf. In a second, we were pumping lead into the pack, but with more excitement than accuracy. How to aim a steep downhill shot is always confusing. When our rifles were empty, the old wolf was down and a pup was dragging a leg into impassable slide rocks. We reached the old wolf in time to watch a fierce green fire dying in her eyes. I realized then and have known ever since that there was something new to me in those eyes, something known only to her in the mountain. I was young then and full of trigger itch. I thought that because fewer wolves meant more deer, that no wolves would mean a hunter's paradise. But after seeing the green fire die, I sensed that neither the wolf or the mountain agreed with such an idea, or such a, can't read that, but that's pretty poignant to think of watching that wildness die in the wolves. And we pretty much wiped the wolves out. there were wolves into the 50s around the Huachucas. This area is too built up now. Wolves are really animals of wilderness. And even though they're talking again about critical habitat for the wolves here, we will probably never have wolves in this part of Cochise County. But they did restore them, and I like to use restore rather than reintroduce. They did restore them to the White Mountains, to the very area where this happened. In fact, what is today? Today's Friday. Well, Sunday night I'm going to be camping right where this happened. They went through Aldo Leopold's journals, and they pretty well know it's on the Black River right outside of Alpine. They know just about where this incident happened. And there's a chance I could hear them howl, yeah. And that would be so cool to hear the wolves howling in the place where the fierce green fire died out. Yeah. They have reintroduced them in northern Mexico as well. And they had the first pups born this year down there from the reintroduction project. So there are about 80 wolves out in north central Arizona now in the White Mountains around the Black River, and also and several. They've had some hit by cars. They've had some shot. They've had some that were preying on ranchers' cattle and were either killed or taken back into captivity. But they seem to be doing okay, and it's great that they're back. Yeah, right. Well, there are folks who are upset, they're taking our elk, and yet we see on the list the elk, the Merriam's elk that occurred up in the White Mountains is gone. It's completely extinct. The elk that are up there now are Rocky Mountain elk that were brought in and released and are really not a normal part of the ecosystem. We talked about the black bears earlier. We had grizzly bears in Arizona. In the Huachucas, we had grizzly bears, the Mexican grizzly, and this again is a subspecies that is completely gone. Bear killed in 1957. Sierra del Nido is just south of Douglas. This one again from Mexico, just south of us in the 50s. So not that long ago, there were still grizzlies down there. The Mexican grizzly is the same grizzly that also extended into California. It's on the California state flag. You've got the UCLA Bruins and the Cal Bears. That all reflects the grizzly that used to live there and is no longer found. And the difference in endangered and extinct is pretty severe. Extinct is forever. And unless we have some sort of Jurassic Park breakthrough, once an animal is extinct, we'll never see them again. Is that the end of my talk? It may well be. I've got some pictures to show you just to finish up here. This has been kind of a hobby of mine for the last couple of years. I've got a friend that bought some property over in the Sulphur Springs Valley, and he asked me to look after it. And I went and looked at it, and it is hammered. It is so overgrazed. It's just dirt and mesquite up on pedestals where all the topsoil had washed away. I told him not to buy it. It just looks like nothing could ever live there. But he bought it, and he asked me to start the restoration process, and I've been doing some work over there. And I started noticing tracks in the wash there that look like bobcat tracks. So I got one of those little game cameras and put it out in the wash. And I'm going to run through just a couple of years. This is what the habitat looks like. Doesn't that look like a lovely habitat? Wouldn't you think there'd be an awful lot of stuff living there? Here's what I've gotten in the last couple years. Jackrabbit, you'd expect that. I put out a little basin and put some water in it, thinking that water is going to attract some wildlife. So I got jackrabbit pretty much right off the bat. There comes a bobcat strolling down the path. A raccoon out in the middle of the desert. There's a hooded skunk. Of course, not only javelinas, but here's a little kangaroo rat down here. And here's a wood rat and another kangaroo rat there and another kangaroo rat there. Here comes the bobcat walking back with a kangaroo rat in his mouth. Here's a hooded skunk that is very black, very different color than that one we had a little earlier. Jackrabbit and cottontail, and jackrabbit and cottontail together. Here's two different bobcats. You can tell from the spot pattern that these are two different cats. There he is again. Came sneaking down the wash one evening, and an hour later came back with a jackrabbit in his mouth. There's a badger. I got lots and lots of coyote pictures. Mule deer. Group of coyotes. Coyote meets skunk. Whoops. Gray fox. Another picture of that dark hooded skunk. I spread out some bird seed, and the kangaroo rats had a party. And there's at least two different species of kangaroo rats here. The length of the tail, and I had to blow this up and take measurements and figure out, but I was able to ascertain that there's two different species of kangaroo rats in that picture.
You put the sticks in the thing so that if anything.
Yeah, if anything, and I've got a little wire ladder, and I put some sticks in there, so if anything fell in, it wouldn't drown in the. And I haul a 5-gallon jug of water down the road to this wash every week and check the chip. But I go home, and it's like opening presents on Christmas morning. You got that chip, and you never know what's in there. Here's more mule deer with a buck with those forked antlers. Here's my most recent bobcat picture. And the camera that I've got out now has the capability of taking video too. He really likes that water. And it has been so interesting because even things like jackrabbits, I've seen a million jackrabbits, but I usually either see them sitting still, thinking that you haven't seen them at all, and they're going to remain rock still and hope you don't notice them, or you see them dashing off at full speed. You rarely see a jackrabbit just at leisure, you know, just strolling around, coming up, getting a drink out of the trough, laying down, grooming himself, scratching his ear. You just don't see that. And it's been such a real treat to check those game cams and see the wildlife. And this is a place, I've been going out there for 3 or 4 years now. I have yet to see any of those things in person. They show up in the camera, but I never see them in person. So it's just an example of how much life is going on out there that we don't see, how much of it is hidden from us. And we have to look for tracks and signs and things like that. Tomorrow we're going to have a field trip on the San Pedro from 9 till 11:30 or 12. We'll look for tracks and signs and holes and things. We'll look for caterpillars. We'll identify as much as we can and tell a few stories along the way. If you're able to come out, we would love to have you come, but I know some of you are not going to be able to be there. But it should be a good day to be out. We'll meet at the San Pedro house at 9 o'clock, yeah. And one of the things that I would like to do, have talked about, is trying to get a series of these game cams. I know it's not the Sky Island Alliance, but it's one of the groups that has been doing conservation work. They have had game cameras out throughout southeastern Arizona. They had some funding for staff to go check them and all. That funding has run out. They're looking for volunteers to go check these cameras. And I'm going to try and get in touch with them and find out how we can involve the master naturalist to adopt a few of these cameras in local areas and be checking the cameras for them. We also, I've got in touch with the folks at the National Phenology Lab, and they're going to do a presentation for us, the class in December. and talk about some citizen science we can do. And one of those may be a game camera setup. So it's a way that you can monitor what's going on. You know, what's happening when you're not there, which is always that question that I always have. So, I've gone through 2 or 3 different ones. They're just cheap ones. I'm afraid to, spend $300 on a camera and leave it out there and have somebody walk off with it. So most of these cost about $100. I get them off eBay or, and the one that's out now is the fanciest one I've got with that video capability. Several of them can take either still pictures or video. The one I've gotten out now, I've got it set so that it takes one still picture and then 15 seconds of video and then one still picture. So I'm able to get both, and that's kind of nice. Yeah, you've got to learn where to put them. If you've got a branch swaying in front of your camera, you end up with 800 pictures of a branch. So any questions? Thank you all for your patience. Yes? Mm-hmm.